Today's February 28th, 2021. I'm BrentNally, and I'm here with a fantastic documentary filmmaker that's focused primarily on disruptive technologies in the health space, Eric Merola. Eric, welcome.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Yeah, good to be here as well, too. We've had some communication since I found out about your documentary that we'll be focusing on primarily today called The God Cells. I saw this documentary in early 2019, right after I had mesenchymal or mesenchymal stem cells injected treatment for me in December 20th, 2018 in Nuevo Vallarta, Mexico at Dream Body Clinic. And then I come across your documentary just from continuing to do research on stem cells. And I don't think your face is in that documentary, like at the beginning, but your voice a lot at the beginning. And I'm like, wait a minute, this voice is really familiar. And then I realized that I'd seen some of your other documentaries, the Burzynski documentaries years ago, which we can talk about that. But this conversation, we're going to be primarily talking about health. I'm on my longevity spaceship. My audience is focused on how we can extend healthy lifespan as much as possible. And this is something that rarely ever comes up. And that's one of the intriguing things about this story. And I think you've done more than any other person on this planet to help get this technology, this biotechnology of fetal stem cells out there in the world. But still, even in the longevity space, I'll send people your documentary. Most people, when I follow up with them, they'll be like, that was very surprising and well done and fascinating. But we'll get into the reasons of why maybe this isn't more known and not taking off as much as we believe that it should be. So with that, I just want to kind of kick it to you to run with whatever I presented there in whatever way you'd like.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it was really around 2008, 2009, I was working on Madison Avenue in advertising. I have a background in fine art and graphic design. And after many years in Manhattan, I enjoyed my time there of that field of work. I realized I never wanted to do that for the rest of my life. That combined with being a fan of documentaries, that combined with knowing how to do all post-production on any sort of video, commercial, et cetera, working on movies, documentaries, and other movies, I just always wanted to make a documentary. And long story short, I discovered the Burzynski story, made this thing on the weekends, credit card debt, honestly calling in sick to work sometimes just to make sure the interviews could be scheduled according to other people's schedules. And before I knew it, and after about a year, I had a film, and I no experience with this world. I thought maybe it would just end up on YouTube. And, in 2010, YouTube wasn't what it is today. That was over a decade ago. And next thing I know, I'm getting into film festivals. It's on the documentary channel. I got on Netflix. And then it just became this sort of viral thing. Back in the early days when there was viral things, and it just all of a sudden I was like, I can quit my job and do this as a career. And so I poured all of profits from DVD sales into Burzynski Part 2 and my third film, Second Opinion. And then during that time, DVD sales went away, and I never made any money off documentary films ever again. And so to get to the God Cells, so I have to tell the long version of the story, sorry. But anyway, but also at this point, I had collected, if you would, enough wealthy followers that really appreciated what I was doing. And I built a relationship with a legitimate nonprofit 501c3 in California, whose sole purpose is to help independent filmmakers. So you can either do fundraising through them, or if you have people that can donate to you, you could funnel the money through the 501c3. They take a piece of it for their time, and then they write it off on their taxes, scot-free, blah, blah, blah. So, but one of my financiers, if you would, who helped me, or believers in me, kept pestering me about fetal stem cells. And honestly, I get emails all the time, as you can imagine, you should do a documentary film about this and that and the other. And since COVID, you should see my inbox about what I should be doing next about COVID.
Right.
So anyway, I decided to look into it. And honestly, I treated it like I would anything else. I'll look into it, and I just never had any expectations. And long story short, I went from following this clinic in Mexico, which is now defunct and turned out to be not legitimate, even though they had their legitimate phase. to find out that they had actually stolen the cells from this Ukrainian clinic and research lab, which really just deepened the story. And then all of a sudden I'm in Ukraine getting the therapy, filming myself and like, you know, this whole thing. And so and all of a sudden I had the God cells, you know, so that's kind of like how it came to be. Like all the movies I do, there's no roadmap. I mean, maybe Burzynski Part 2 and Second Opinion were roadmapped because I always wanted those to be done all along anyway. You know, anyway, so the God cells, really, I started researching the God cells in 2014. And so it was all through 2014, 2015. By middle of 2016, I was in Ukraine getting the therapy. And by 2017, you know, the film was released. And now I'm working on the sequel, which COVID put it back, got put in the back burner because of COVID, but I'm back. But the God cells specifically is not only about a stem cell therapy, it is probably one of the most contested and controversial styles of fetal stem cell therapy, and that is harvesting at the end of the first trimester, between 7 to 12 weeks, essentially all of the primary stem cell systems of the human fetus taken from a voluntary abortion. And for obvious reasons, that is highly controversial and highly misunderstood. So I'm just going to keep going. So first of all, you know, to most people think, what? That, you mean a bunch of people are getting pregnant on purpose to donate stem cells? Absolutely not. There are 10 million-ish abortions every year. Like I'm rusty on the stats. It's like
I think I've actually listened to you so much. You've said 50 million at some point.
Okay, excuse me. Thank you.
Whether it's 10 or 50 million, like there's a lot. There's 7.8 billion people on the planet.
There's like a couple of abortions a second worldwide, and all of those abortions are thrown away as biological waste. Whether you agree with abortion or highly disagree with abortion, it's in existence. So it's just one of those things. Like you could hate guns or love guns, they're there. You know, you could name a laundry list of things that you can compare it to. It's a reality. So these clever scientists had been working on this since the 70s. And let me describe how they discovered it. Like all good scientific discoveries, all of them are accidental, no different than discovery of the first, antibiotic because of the staph infection growing on a windowsill in a petri dish, you know, and so many things. We could probably have another podcast on all the scientific discoveries done by accident. So what happened was, for decades, we have known that women who have donated their bodies to science, their autopsies are given to science to check out. There was this consistent line of data showing women who had been given birth to males, the male organism, they found male DNA, male chromosomes in the hearts and the brains more predominantly in women. And then after further investigation, they realized these male chromosomes, these were remnants of male fetal stem cells migrating out of the womb into the mother host and repairing congenital heart defects, things that were going on in the brain, things like that. And then to add more to the data, there's plenty of data to show that women who have multiple sclerosis, who are pregnant, their symptoms have subsided. Cured? No, but they've noticed their symptoms would subside. So you see where I'm going with this. So they collected enough of this data and went, wow. And it was really these Ukrainians that spent the most time with this. And so they started in the 70s testing this theory on, animals. So everything from mice to cats to dogs. I mean, I think even to large farm animals. Pharma does the same thing. You name it, they tested it on it. And, it's not as simple as this, but essentially, it was the Chernobyl disaster at the time in the 80s that kind of opened the floodgates for these scientists to have less regulatory roadblocks. And in fact, the first patient that these specific scientists treated was a child who was suffering from aplastic anemia, which is bone marrow failure, which was because of the parents buying milk from a radiated milk farm due to Chernobyl. And they found this child in a state hospital in Kyiv, living off of blood transfusions, waiting in line for a bone marrow transplant to save his life. They tracked down the parents. They basically said to the parents, we'd like to inject your child with these liver cells. It's, the parents had no idea what these scientists were asking of them, but they said, they're like, we don't think it'll hurt your child. It might help this child. So one round of injections, somewhat stabilized, did not cure the child. 2 weeks later, second round, complete cure of bone marrow failure. And all they injected this child with was the stem cells from the liver of a 7 to 12 week old fetus. And the reason the liver is so important, going back to your mesenchymal stem cell therapy, is at the time of gestation, the liver cells in the human body are or not the liver cells, but the liver contains the precursors of your body's entire bone marrow system, i.e. immune system. So they knew this, and they figured, they were able to calculate this and all the things I just described. And basically that was their first human subject. And it cured their first human subject of bone marrow failure. So off to the races they went. They presented this data to the Ukraine Ministry of Health, and one thing led to another. And with a clever juggling of bureaucracy combined with solid science, they managed to get this legalized in the Ukraine, not without the traditional today, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, 20 years of clinical trials to get this to market. So it was pretty spectacular leap over bureaucratic, So ever since the 80s, and really not until the early 90s, really, but in the early 90s, they started offering this as a service. And all it was like a tiny room in a tiny state hospital in Kyiv that they rented out, under the Ukraine Ministry of Health's permission, and to what they have evolved into today, to like a multi-million-dollar Silicon Valley building with the biggest state-of-the-art lab of fetal stem cell harvesting, sorting, researching, testing, and applying clinically on Earth. And the reason of that is not just to brag about them, because the country of Ukraine is simply the only country on the planet of Earth that this is legal and regulated. It is not legal in China. It is not legal anywhere. You can get derivatives of fetal stem cells in a select group of clinical trials in the United States, but it is not the same. When I say derivatives, that means they took a fetus from like 20 years ago, and they've been replicating one form of the cell, and maybe a brain cell or a heart cell or a liver cell, for 20 years. And they've been giving it to certain people under certain clinical trial guidelines. In EmCell's case, you're getting the whole package, from the nervous system to the cardiovascular system, to the immune system, to everything. And they can do it in such a way where, depending on your ailment, they can personalize it where you get larger doses of certain types of cells versus than what other people would get. So for example, if you are waiting in line for a heart transplant and you want to roll the dice on fetal stem cells saving you from that, you can go on their heart disease protocol and you will be getting a much higher dose of the cardiovascular and actual precursor heart cells, or the pre-mesenchymal, in the heart terms, cells to save your heart, for example. And that's done, anyway, I don't want to get a long tangent on that. But so same with Parkinson's or any neurological disease, you get more of those types of cells. And in fact, now with their new facility that is sent into like the spinal canal and the spinal fluid for more direct delivery. And the kids with autism, very similar, except not the spinal, you name it. I mean, I can go on specific ailments, but like what's interesting for me is, unlike my other films, one of the patients that I was following said, Eric, you're doing a film about this. And at first he said, have you gotten the therapy? And I went, no. He goes, well, why not? I said, it really never occurred to me. And he said, how can you make a documentary about this and not get the therapy? and I just hit me like a ton of bricks. I said, you're so right. Like, how could I, I don't know what I was thinking, I was so focused on following these people and following the technology. I knew full and well they had an anti-aging protocol. And so honestly, so in the end of the God Cells, the last 30 minutes, as you said, you'll see me, as you may have mentioned, that you see me in it. So I thought, what a better way to show what they're doing than to document myself going through the whole thing. So that's what I did. And honestly, I had no expectations. My goal was to get the movie done and I was excited. There's a whole nother story about how EmCell gained I got EmCell to trust me to do this. This was no easy feat. That's another 30-minute conversation, but we can get into that if you want. But anyway, I was just flabbergasted by the results I got. And they continue, and I get it on an annual basis. And I continue to have incredible results personally. And this is the longest I've gone without it. My last treatment was June of 2019, and I'm finally going again this May of 2021. COVID was a big part of that. And finishing up my last documentary movie was a part of that delay as well. I mean, EmCell was shut down for a good portion of last year because no international travel was allowed. And it's crazy because they just finished their multi-million-dollar facility in November 2019 with a much larger patient load, to be able to expand their schedules, and the rug got pulled out from underneath them and everybody that wanted to go. So anyway, hopefully this year will change. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. There's so many different fascinating aspects of this story that it's kind of hard to know where to start. So I'm gonna just try my hand at it. So
Sure.
first of all, you mentioned, I started following EmCell on social media in 2019. So I follow them on Instagram and on LinkedIn and on YouTube, and they don't have much of a following, which is part of the intriguing part of this story. It's like, you've
Yeah.
done a great job with this documentary. I find this stuff fascinating. I don't have much of a following, like anti-aging longevity is something that is like, should be the most fascinating thing ever to anybody. If you understand what it truly is, we're trying to make people more healthy. That's really all we're actually trying to do. But we're trying to do it by understanding the aging process, the disease process, and how to really get to the root cause of it is the key here. And so with EmCell, from speaking with you, and I've had some of my followers actually go to EmCell, and actually, I've communicated with them a little bit. They've gotten a few that I've spoken to have had good results, but EmCell seems to be extremely busy. So don't let their social media following kind of be
Yeah.
a impact on, how busy that they are.
They're
As you
not
mentioned,
salesmen. They're
right?
just,
They're not. That's the thing that I hear all the time, is that they're very, very dedicated scientists, and you can tell that they're very passionate, very ethical. The feedback that you get from people is that when you're there, they treat you like no other type of healthcare practitioner have in America, for example. Let's just use America as an example. And so my point is that they built this state-of-the-art facility now. They're on social media, not with much of a following. And I think the technology is pretty incredible, but yet I interview all these, gerontologists and longevity scientists and just anti-aging, health-focused longevity, biorejuvenation type people. And I'd say across the board, pretty much like none of them have just heard of EmCell. And part of the confusion here is that they're called EmCell, EmCell, but the actual language of Ukraine does not have the word fetal. So it's EM stands for embryonic, but it's really scientifically not embryonic stem cells they're using. It's fetal stem cells, but it's a language problem. And then one thing that you touched upon, but I just want to make sure it's clear to everybody, like from a geopolitical standpoint, the only reason Kiev, Ukraine, and EmCell is really even able to exist right now is because of the USSR, Russia being broken up, Kiev having their own sovereign nation state now. They're about 60 million people. And so they're able to do this, but it's not legal anywhere else. And then that whole conversation, as you mentioned, is a rabbit hole because of people's religious beliefs and stuff about fetal stem cells. You had the Bush administration 15 years ago or so banning all fetal stem cell research. Trump actually just played his hand at that a couple of years ago, I believe in 2019, cutting or banning fetal stem cell research. So in other words, you have all these things going on. I was just interjecting right here to make sure that the pieces of the puzzle are kind of being lined up for the audience and they understand all this. So any one of those things that you think are important, why don't you take it from here, Eric?
Yeah. Okay. I'll start right there. So Bush did not ban fetal. He banned embryonic. So let's talk about the differences. Because honestly, fetal isn't even on people's radar, which is just adds to the mystery and the confusion over this whole space. A fetal stem cell is anytime once sort of the fetus is formed in the womb. An embryonic stem cell is a 5 to 7 day old blastocyst that is created in a petri dish by putting a female egg and artificially inseminating it with a male sperm and growing it, and there is the embryo. It's almost, I wouldn't say single cell, but it's a blastocyst. It has not formed any organs. It has not formed any arms or legs. It has not formed a brain. It has not formed anything. So a fetal stem cell is during that process. So that's the confusion. So going back to the language barrier or the no vocabulary word, technically, while you got mesenchymal cells in America, that's considered adult, right? Because you are an adult and they took it from you, correct? Isn't that what they did?
No, I did not do autologous.
Okay.
I did allogeneic, which they came from the Wharton's jelly of the umbilical cord of a healthy human birth a few days before.
Forgive me. Okay, so that's umbilical. That's a whole other subject. We can get back on that in a minute. But like in America, the common stem cell type that people get that is regulated in America is adult. So anyway, the point is that in Ukraine and in certain regions of the world, there's no fetal stage. They consider embryonic or adult. even if it's 5 weeks old in the womb, that's still adult in their world. So does that make sense? So anyway, yeah. So why they call it EmCell is still, I don't know. Yeah, it is bizarre. Yeah, because maybe I'm getting it backwards because I'm a little rusty on this. So maybe no, I'm so sorry. It is, forgive me, I got it wrong. It is the embryo until birth. That is the problem here. They consider it embryonic up until birth. So it could be 8 months, 3 weeks old. It's still embryonic in the world of Ukraine vocabulary. Once the human exits the womb, now it's an adult. Make sense? Okay, that's right. That's the reason why the confusion is there. That's why they're called EmCell, embryonic cell, because in their world, in their vocabulary, it makes perfect sense from a vocabulary point of view. In America, there's 3 distinctions: embryonic, fetal, and adult. So yeah.
Beautiful. And I actually come into mind here, I want to point out, I've personally watched every single video on the EmCell YouTube channel, including they just started uploading a few testimonials recently. And then I'll search these people if they have their names in there, because it's a lot of testimonials. It's a lot of Western speaking people. They have, I think, some, Chinese or Asian speaking people. They had subtitles, some Ukrainian people, but it's mainly Westerners that go there. And I'll search their name in Google and Facebook and LinkedIn. And I found some of these people in 2019 when I was doing all this research, and I private messaged with some of them to make sure that they weren't scammers or something. Maybe they even still were. That'd be a pretty elaborate scam if you're giving your real name, you're doing all that. But I didn't think so. But the point is that the testimonials of this stuff are pretty incredible. And right now, with me, especially volunteering for Leaf and stuff, I want to make sure that the audience understands that this is all basically anecdotal. What my company Longevity Plan is trying to do is we're trying to actually create better biomarkers to test for aging with DNA methylation tests and all grip strength, any type of possible biomarker that you could have for aging and health. We want to try and track that. And unfortunately, this whole industry of biomarking age testing within just the whole stem cell industry and the whole health industry is just not well built out at all. Some of it's expensive, and even the gerontology community all kind of don't agree exactly on the science. So this is playing out in real time. But the point that I'm trying to make is that I do believe this technology is incredible, and I do believe that EmCell is an incredible company. And it is frustrating that more people don't know about this. And so I think that I'd love for you to focus on the why of that. So geopolitical, from just an actual location standpoint, you could talk about Kiev a bit about the city and the country of Ukraine. I think it's about 60 million people. You could talk a little bit about anything else that you think is relevant on why don't more people know about this? And being one final thing that I'll say for this, Eric, is that you have probably almost certainly done more than any other human to make people more aware of this. So we appreciate the perspective coming from you.
Sure. Well, the first thing, the reason why people don't know about this is because most people don't understand what stem cells are. We start there. And they certainly don't fully, to expand on that, they don't understand the wide variety of types and how they are simply not created equal. And it comes to a therapeutic clinical application of them. So that's the biggest problem. Easy example, why would you go to Ukraine to get stem cells when my Aunt Jean just got it in Florida last week? Do you know what I mean? Whoa. You don't even, so you're not even grasping the range of going on here, So there's that. And because I can go back to that in a minute. Now, the fact that they come from abortions is something that certain parts of society don't even want to get near. For example, we've seen a lot of these multi-part documentary series on health. And I believe, I might get this title completely incorrect, but I think it was titled something like The Truth About Stem Cells or something to that effect. It was a 8 or 9 part series. Did I get the title of it correct?
I believe so. I watched it in 2019 and early 2019.
Let me ask you a question. Did you ever in the entire 9-part series, or however parts it was, ever see the word fetal or the subject of fetal stem cells brought up in the Truth About Stem Cells 9-hour documentary series?
No, and that's the whole point. I interview all these brilliant scientists, and there's all these conventions, pre-COVID, they're all online now that go on everywhere. And I read all these journals, and I'm in this community, and nobody talks about this stuff ever. That's
there you go. So you have that hurdle. So it's almost like this void It's like it's really interesting, and I don't really know what to say. I mean, it's more of just trying to explain this space. And like going back just one step to people not understanding stem cells, even the highest level so-called medical journalists don't get it. Like I got an email yesterday from somebody that wants to go to EmCell while I'm there in May. Because that usually happens. I tell everybody I'm going to be there, and honestly, it's great. The more the merrier. And honestly, I always end up finding a cool case to include in the documentary, because a lot of people with some very serious ailments go. Anyway, the point is, they sent me an article from MD Anderson stating simply, if you undergo a stem cell transplant, you have to have your COVID vaccine re-administered. That's what it said. And it didn't mention bone marrow. It didn't mention anything. But what they were talking about was a bone marrow transplant. Yes, that is the first ever stem cell therapy, by replacing your entire bone marrow, where they reduce your immune system to nothing. They replace you. But even the journalist, the medical writer from MD Anderson got it wrong. So they're making people scared to get stem cell therapy to ruin their COVID vaccine, or any vaccine for that matter, whether it be polio or whatever, So like, that's another example, like to like how the grave misunderstanding of the mistake of overgeneralizing stem cell types. They're very, very, very different. I often use the comparison, like a tricycle is a form of transportation. A Lear jet is a form of transportation. You can't put those in the same category if you're talking about which form of transportation should I take from here to, you want to go from New York to Paris. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm getting a little abstract there, but okay, so there's the abortion issue, there's the, sort of the void, and then there's the misunderstanding of stem cells. I don't know if the Ukraine location, I think it does have a lot to do with it, because a lot of people still think it's Russia, or, or they think they need a visa. Like, it's very confusing. And honestly, it was a little daunting for me to think, oh my God, I'm going to the Ukraine? It's like, whoa. And then I will say though, once you arrive, and I've been to a lot of European cities, and I've been to like Tokyo, and I've been to China, and I've been to a lot of places, Kyiv, Ukraine rivals with the most incredible cultural meccas on earth. And in fact, in many respects, it's more spectacular because it hasn't been totally westernized. I mean, you might find one McDonald's and one KFC, excuse me. But, it's still the heart of old school Ukrainian culture, with the highest levels of technology, the highest levels of everything. So it is a wonderful place to visit as well. But, I obviously too, because stem cells are so new, even though they've been around so long, there's no real phase 3 clinical studies. Like, one of the things that people will say is, I tried this type of stem cell, but, I saw your movie. I think I'm going to ask my doctor about fetal stem cells. And I'm like, you can do that.
No chance. Yeah.
But they're going to tell you, not to do it. And then it's dangerous. And here's another good one. A lot of people believe that somehow fetal stem cells cause cancer. And what they're confusing it with, once again, is embryonic. A 5-day-old blastocyst is very dangerous to inject into a human body. It has not become anything yet. That is a rogue cell that can become almost anything, including a malignant or even a non-malignant cell that just goes out of control. You don't want that. So if anything, also, the irony is that fetal stem cells, there's a lot of data to suggest that it encourages the tumor suppressor genes in the system to prevent cancer. So that's kind of like the short list. I'm sure I'm forgetting something. Maybe there's something you can think of that I didn't mention that sort of describes the sort of void and why fetal stem cells is so easily ignored and overlooked.
I think it's just a general disbelief by many people who study, longevity or geroscience, or just medical practitioners in general, like thinking like, oh, I would have known about this if this was a real thing by now.
Yeah,
and
how many times have you heard that?
Exactly. And my whole thing is I'm trying to focus on solving the human aging problem. And so I have to unturn every single stone to do that, because we haven't done that yet, that I know of. Maybe someplace somebody's done it, but they're keeping it secret if they have. And so that's the way that I look at it. And so probably should have done this at the beginning of the interview, but if you haven't yet, definitely watch the God Cells. I'm going to have a link in the description below to not only the video, but the movie, the documentary, but that documentary is on your YouTube channel called The God Cells, where you have lots of other great content on there. You have some clips broken up, but then you also have a really good presentation that you gave, I believe in early 2019, that's about an hour long with tons of other information there from what you recorded the documentary in 2016. Is that right?
I started filming in 2014.
Okay.
Then I released it in 2017. Yeah. So 2014 was a lot of just grunt work research, but I started filming in late 2014. But anyway, yeah, based on my YouTube channel, yeah, I mean, I constantly, whenever I go back, I will cover new stories if I feel like there's one really worth covering, and I'll release that on my YouTube channel. Like I have everything on there for free. It's also on Amazon Prime, the movie itself. So I'm always growing the YouTube channel as well, which I'll do a lot more this year. I even have a podcast that I do periodically. There's like 10 episodes on there now. It's called, you go to stemcellsmovie.com, or even if you did the godcells.com, it'll redirect you to stemcellsmovie.com. I'm always trying to put out new content. So yeah.
Yeah, I've listened to all of those podcasts, which your podcasts are basically like an interview like this with somebody who's been to EmCell in Kiev, Ukraine, and received the treatment. Yeah. And just them sharing their feedback. And, you know, you do, I think, give a disclaimer at the beginning of every one of those, to my knowledge, of like, hey, this isn't necessarily typical. Not everybody gets this phenomenal of results, but some of the results of some of these people are just, I mean, quite frankly, they're just pretty much unbelievable. But I do believe that these are genuine. And so that's why I just really encourage my audience, you know, to check this out. I'd say start. This is my recommendation. Eric, you can agree or disagree. I think people should start with watching your full documentary first, The God Cells. Yeah. Then after that, I think your 1 hour presentation was really good from 2019. That you share some like kind of new and different stuff that wasn't in the documentary. And then from there, there's a solid, I think, 30-minute video that's on your YouTube channel called The God Cells, your YouTube channel, where you kind of show the entire facility. This is getting into what you were talking about maybe 20 minutes ago, about how you really put in a lot of work to gain the trust of the EmCell employees to bring in not only just an outsider, an American, but with your camera crew and actually record stuff.
I think I'm the only guy to get in their lab with a camera. I don't think anybody's been allowed in that lab.
And you'll see in that video that their equipment and their technology is state of the art, and their attention to detail and how long. I mean, you said, you know, EmCell has been around since the early 90s, but this technology was even precursed, you know, a couple decades even before that. So I guess one of the really intriguing parts of this story, if the audience hasn't caught on yet, is that this has been going on for so long. They've been iterating, improving. I mean, these people are the forefront leaders in fetal stem cell technology, as far as I'm concerned, at EmCell. And so if you want to learn about this stuff, go to them. You know, if you're going to be searching PubMed, and if you're going to be searching all these really, in my opinion, credible sources, it's just, this is like a glitch in the matrix or something right now. And so this is the point, like, we need to change this. We need people to investigate this more.
Here's another really interesting point. Yes, I agree. I think that people really need to investigate this more, as I have. I mean, I think, honestly, I dare say I'm the only journalist on earth who has done this story. I mean, it's really kind of flabbergasting. Like, nobody has done this. Again, I'm probably the only journalist. I am the only journalist that has gotten this close to them as far as trust and having access to what they're doing behind the scenes. But here's a really interesting point about fetal stem cells. I mean, you're thinking about this, the medical system as we see it today, where most big innovations are usually a proprietary method or a proprietary substance, say, and it goes through the clinical trial process through FDA authorization. And that is an extremely expensive process, especially when you get into the phase 3 double-blind study phase of this, where it could cost upwards of multiple hundreds of millions of dollars to pay for multiple hospitals to do these huge studies in hopes of getting this therapy approved by the Food and Drug Administration to enter the market. That is a huge monetary investment. And their payoff, like say something simple like Viagra or Propecia or any drug that's patented, is a massive windfall of pharmaceutical profits, or profits for the pharmaceutical company releasing that. In the case of fetal stem cells, if EmCell's consider this, like I had conversations about this with them. I think it's okay to talk about this. Like they were talking, I had asked them, I was like, you know, how could you bring this to the mainstream? How could you bring this to the United States? They're like, well, Eric, don't think we haven't thought of that. What they were thinking about doing, and still might, but I'm going to preface this with, if they did this, it would be entirely philanthropic. It would not be for their benefit. It would, if anything, it would be for the world's benefit, with them being the sacrificial lamb in the process. And I'll explain why. Because let's just say you took heart disease, people waiting in line for a heart transplant, say. I don't think anybody needs to go beyond a Google search to understand the severity of a bunch of people waiting in line for a heart transplant, and the cost and the scarcity of finding a heart that will fit you to save your life, right? So, but if the fetal heart cells were injected, and I can't remember the vein, the vein that they go up with, put a stent in near the groin, like in a men, goes right up. That you
My father-in-law just had that done about 10 days ago.
Okay, so after much consideration, there you go. So after much consideration, it's like, okay, if we could raise enough money to do a phase 1 study in the US for just that, that would be easily greenlit by the FDA for phase 1. I mean, how could they not greenlight that? Because with enough data being presented, blah, blah. And let's just say, for instance, though, EmCell bankrolled phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, or even got to phase 2 and got emergency authorization to send this to the market for boom, to cure heart disease, or at least save people from needing a heart transplant and going back to their normal lives. What do you think every other biotech firm in the world would do at that point? They would compete with them and probably take over the market. And not that there's anything wrong with that. We are in a competitive system, are we not? So what I'm trying to get at, though, is it doesn't fit the regulatory framework to care about this therapy from a financial point of view. Even if one of the America's largest biotech firms decided to do this, good luck patenting fetal stem cells. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? There's a reason why antibiotics cost $3, because there's no cornering of the market on that. And given how today's current regulatory structure is, only the big boys can play ball and get their therapies to market. And I say big boys, that means they have the bankroll to go through this system and get their therapies to market. Not to say that there isn't a lot of incredible technologies that have gotten to market, but there are limitations in that regard. There's no way to patent a fetal stem cell. You can patent the methods and then the ways of harvesting and everything under the sun. But anybody else, once you've gotten this all ready to market and did all of that work, can alter it enough to legally slide by and compete with that other entity. And I mean, wouldn't that be wonderful? I would personally love to see that. I would love every biomedical firm to be competing with one another for the best possible fetal stem cell technology for a host of ailments, including anti-aging and longevity, of course. So there's that barrier that not a lot of people think about, but this is the kind of stuff that I lay in bed at night and analyze. You know what I mean? It's like, right. I've really, really tried to crack this nut in every way. And that is another huge barrier. It doesn't fit the mold. That's why I'll say one more thing. That's why you see hundreds, if not, maybe not hundreds, but a lot of mesenchymal adult stem cell clinics every corner of every city, well, every corner of every state, at least across America. I mean, everybody's doing it. And because it fits, you know what I mean? Like you can't patent that. How can you patent removing cells from a person and give it? Can't do it. So same with fetal. Yeah. Especially when it's biological waste. It'd be different if the source of the cells were some kind of scarcity. It is so abundant, the technology or the source of the cells. After all, you're talking about biological waste, Yeah,
definitely. But I mean, that's what we want to get to. We want to get to where the marketplace is competing to make this stuff better and better and getting it to market faster and faster and cheaper economies of scale. So that's, probably my greatest motivation for doing, this video with you. And I think it's probably yours as well too, is that we can get more people aware of this technology and get it to grow faster, because I believe that it's incredible technology that shouldn't just be, in one little clinic in Kiev, Ukraine. And to be clear, as you've kind of already pointed out with all the details, I don't believe that this is EmCell's fault. They're doing the best that they can with the resources they have and the situation that they're in geopolitically, and, with all the legal barriers and everything that you've kind of already gone into. So,
they have tried. I was going to interject to say they have tried. They have turned over every stone and rock to open up and expand into another country and have been denied. I mean, they've been doing this for years. with all the proper legal teams, all the proper lobbyists, all the proper everything to do this by the book, because they would never want to go somewhere where it's not legal. That's why you don't see them setting up shop in Mexico, because it's also not legal in Mexico.
Right.
So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, to be clear for people, in case they're not 100% clear on that, it's because it's fetal stem cells. Fetal stem cells specifically is what's illegal in every single country, you know, as far as Eric and I are aware of, except for Ukraine.
At least in a clinical setting. It's legal to research it, but it is illegal to administer it to a human being, including every country, unless it's under some sort of, in the United States case, an FDA authorized clinical trial study. That's it. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks for all those distinctions, because I basically meant that, but I didn't say that. So I'm really glad you added in those important details. Okay, so if you want to learn more, definitely watch The God Cells, the documentary. Then I recommend, and Eric agreed, follow up by watching. Eric, you gave a great presentation in early 2019. Then there was also an interview that I watched of you that was, and the name of the YouTube channel eludes me now. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I talk about my whole life.
Yeah, that one was really good.
I put that on the God Cells YouTube channel as well. You can find that. It's something like, Eric Merola, 2010 to 2019, and I described like my career or whatever, Eric Merola career. I actually got permission to, it's on the Truth About Health conference YouTube channel.
Yeah,
That's was the Truth About Health conference that I did the presentation and the interview, but they allowed me permission to also mirror those. I uploaded them to the God Cells YouTube channel as well. So you can see it there. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. For me, I think I saw your presentation in early 2019, roughly right when it came out, but then it wasn't until summer of 2019 when that interview was uploaded on your YouTube channel. So there's a few months lag there. And I understand you just explained you had to get approval from them to upload it. So I thought that was really good information as well, too. So that's where I recommend people start. Now, for the hardcore scientists that want to dig in and, read, papers to really validate this science, I think either you've sent it to me or somebody else. I've read some papers that EmCell has produced, and it was, pretty in-depth and convincing science and storytelling as far as I was concerned. But what do you have that I can link in the description below as far as, you'll have to sync up with me afterwards via email?
Well, I mean, obviously, they're actually revamping their website. And they're always trying to publish new publications, but I'm going to get into the science. I don't know what to give you to link yet. I'll get back to you on that. But let's get into the science. Yeah. So I'm going to start with the most exciting thing that they have done, and which should be on the cover of like Time magazine. They have cured male infertility. I mean, men who are incapable of conceiving children can 35% cure rate with a multi-year study using Ukrainian subjects, 35%. Can now have children. Not a magic bullet, clearly nothing in the world is, and nor is there therapy for every ailment, but they managed to hone in on how to reverse this. And the majority of the men, only a small percent, like 6 to 10% of these men can do it the old fashioned way, but the rest of them using like a fertility doctor where they take the sperm, and then they process it, and then they fertilize the egg for the wife or the partner, and then they put it together. So, but it's still the male or the father's DNA, which is all they ever wanted to begin with, right? So that is unbelievable. That's a mind blower. And by the way, I was going to do my sequel based on that, because I was after the release of the first one, they just finished up this work, and I was just floored. And I said, "Oh my God, that's the second movie. I'm going to do a whole sequel on male infertility. Like, how poetic would it be to have discarded human DNA? I'm sorry, it's true." Donated to a technological team of scientists to help give life to a family that cannot previously give life. Like, how perfect. But unfortunately, I haven't given up. I might include maybe one if I can do it. I have one guy who might do it. But I talked to 5 or 6 couples, and none of them would be willing to go on camera. I mean, I think because of the personal issues of all of that surrounds that, they weren't willing to do it. And I completely understand that. But it was a very ambitious attempt on my part to try and do that. But I failed miserably at getting anyone to be in it. There's another reason this film has taken so long. Yeah.
If you listen to a lot of your interviews from 2019, when you were doing, your podcast, you were kind of promoting that concept there.
I was promoting it rigorously. Yeah, rigorously. Right. Yeah, because that's how I got these people to come to me. But I guess once they understood how deeply their lives would be filmed, and even if I didn't use their last names, They were like, no, thank you. Because I wanted to film not the birth itself, but I wanted to hold on to the production timeline to where the child is born. Like I wasn't going to play around. Like I was going to let this thing go on to show the percentages of, let's say, 6 couples who underwent this, and maybe 3 of the, or maybe even 2 of the 6 had a child when they failed every single other traditional fertility treatment available in modern medicine. And that was another part of the story. It wasn't like a fluke. It couldn't really be called anecdotal when every single available therapy was failed. Because I was going to interview, at least get the documentation. If the fertility doctor locally wouldn't be interviewed, I would have gotten the documentation to prove that they failed everything. That was part of the goal as well. But yeah.
Yeah, and I can say, I won't give any names away here, but my wife has a friend who they've had issues with male infertility, and I won't give any more details, even though I do have them. I want to keep their privacy. And I shared with them the documentary in 2019, The God Cells, and some information. Said, hey, I can put you in touch with the documentary filmmaker here, Eric Merola, if you guys want to learn more. And I never heard back from them. They're not really close with me, and I think that's just, and they're smart people. But this story is so incredible. We have to, like, hopefully with what we're trying to do with this interview and all of the work that I know that you've done, it's trying to get people to connect these dots and be like, no, this is real. You just have to validate this for yourself. And when those dots kind of connect, and you're like, so
that being said, Brent, if anybody's listening to this who has this issue, I mean, I can say that every case has to be handled individually, but I have access to funding from my local sort of financiers, if you would, where if the case is something that could work for an inclusion in the documentary where they understand that they're being filmed, I can't guarantee this, but there's a possibility that they can get it for a very low fee because their fee will be paid for from my end, or even paid for in full. I don't know. I just want to throw that out there. And by the way, since I brought that up, because of COVID, in case I forget to tell you this, starting March 1st, today is our recording day, until December 31st, EmCell has significantly reduced their prices. It's just this the rest of this year. So anybody that watches my movie, yada, yada, goes, oh my God, this is probably too expensive for me. It is still not inexpensive, but there is a significant, I consider a significant reduction and they did it for 2 reasons. One, they are very mindful of the economic injuries that everybody has suffered from. They have existing client base that rely on this for certain ailments. They want to go back every year, every 2 years, that they want to help them. And then of course, EmCell, just as I said, they just, finished this massive Silicon Valley style brand new structure and laboratory that was extremely expensive. Not that they got in over their head, but anyway, it was a matter of weeks before that was complete, that COVID hit. And
the timing was awful.
So anyway, it's a very good opportunity if you're kind of on the fence about this, at least from a financial standpoint, to go. And there's easy protocols to follow to deal with COVID. And you can email me, go to the website, ericmerola.com, eric@ericmerola.com. You can link that. I have no issue talking to people, especially since I'm in production on this next movie, and pointing you in the right direction. It's just simple, COVID protocols to follow to get in. And Ukraine has gotten a good handle on the virus. They have they're probably one of the best statistically in the world right now. Anyway, enough of that, but sad to throw that out there since we were on this subject.
Yeah, for sure. Those things are important. And one thing that I guess is kind of related, would love to hear a little bit about your personal experience of receive. I believe you've received 4 and you're going back in, I think you said May, for your 5th scheduled treatment of EmCell. Have you gotten the same treatment every single time? What have been your benefits? Any side effects? What are your thoughts there?
Let's go on that in one moment. Hold that thought, because you asked me a minute ago about science, right? And I jumped into male infertility, but let me give you one more story. So one of the other sort of things that people look at with fetal stem cells, understandably, is, they go, a lot of even really top-notch researchers will jump to the conclusion that, my goodness, this is different DNA. It's not possible for the human body to be injected with foreign DNA without having a rejection or an immune response even. But there's simply no evidence of that. And I have proof of this on a couple of levels. The first of all, if you remember, the whole foundation of the therapy, given of a glimmer of a light of idea of the therapy, was mother host, male child, birth, decades later, male DNA still active in the body. That child, while part of her DNA is not fully her DNA, it is biologically different. For example, that child cannot grow up and qualify for a kidney transplant for that mother. There's no guarantee of that. This is a biologically different, from the DNA standpoint, human being, even though it grew in the mother host womb. So there's that. That right there throws that out the window, that there's no possibility of a rejection of the human host. And secondly, when it comes to that rejection, if you had a rejection, you would suffer from massive fevers, a massive immune response, much worse than your average vaccine immune response that a lot of people experience, even with the COVID vaccine. And nobody experiences that, right? There's that. But here's really the icing on the cake scientifically. And I'm allowed to talk about this now, but I have to preface it with, and I even say this every time and nobody hears me, that EmCell does not offer this as a service. But I'm going to get into the area of telomeres, okay? This therapy, first of all, will not, there's no evidence to suggest this therapy will grow your telomeres, none. There's no therapy that say will make it grow longer, no evidence to say it will grow shorter, no evidence to say anything right now. There's no evidence yet of that. So, and nor is there enough technology to even decipher between the new stem cells and your current stem cells in your system. This is really phenomenal. So I was asked after my first therapy that they were said, we're going to do a study using only Ukrainians, but since you come back so often, we'd love to have somebody that's not Ukrainian in this study, since we are clearly committed to coming back, blah, 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 right? And so I said, sure. It's like, what we're doing, Eric, is we're going to take large amounts of your blood and we're going to do using a flow cytometer, I believe it is. It's not your teleyears. It's not your usual consumer telomere testing methods, which is a whole nother conversation. This is measuring the telomeres down to the white blood cell level using a specific technology. And so what I'm getting at is a year after my first therapy, I had my baseline test and my telomeres were like 5 point something KB. And I don't remember the unit of measurement. That was, so at 2016, I was tested. I did not have a telomeres measured. 2017, second therapy, they drew blood because they drew blood anyway, because they wanted to see what's going on in your system to help design your therapy for that round, right? So then they run it through the testing, measure the telomeres. And like, okay, here's your baseline, 5.23, I believe it was, KB. That was 2017. 2018, I arrived. They take another huge amount of blood for all the obvious reasons. They would need to do your panels for your personalized therapy, but also for telomeres. My telomere average length, listen carefully, everybody. This doesn't mean mine grew, but what they do is they take a snapshot of your telomeres overall, and they average out the length. So in this case, my telomeres average length jumped from 5.23 to like 7.6, okay? That there's no evidence that mine grew. All it did was show that the stem cells that I had 1 year and 2 years previously are not only in my system, but they are reproducing at such a rate that they're competing with the telomere length measurements of mine. There's the only logical explanation, which, forgive me for sounding lowbrow here, but I'm almost like a walking Frankenstein. I mean, I have all of these other telomeres in my system from other, tissue. It's really fascinating. But okay, I'm going to finish this part of the story and I'll get back to the point. So then that's 2018, 2019, I go back that was my last therapy. Same thing, huge amounts of blood, yada, yada, boom. Your telomeres are now over 8. So you're 5.23 KB to over 8. Again, mine didn't grow. We have no evidence. Maybe they grew. We don't know. But that would be irresponsible to say mine grew. But the only logical explanation is these things, the point is scientifically, these are remaining in my body. There is not only is there no rejection, they're setting up shop. They're hanging out. They're doing their thing and regenerating. They're having dormant periods. Everything that our existing stem cells we were born with were designed to do. So you're being injected with sort of a double, triple, quadruple dose, depending on how many times you go, of more human telomeres and stem cells, heart cells, liver cells, lung cells, brain cells, et cetera, into your system to give you further longevity, further strength, and further, ideally, life expansion, health expansion, further everything. And that's a mind blower.
Yeah.
I mean, and so like anybody that says your body will reject it outright, there's the proof. I'm sorry. How do you explain that my telomeres jumped 2 points in 3 years? I mean, you know what I mean? How do you explain that? So
yeah.
anyway.
So a couple of things. So the KB, I believe that's kilobytes. And so 55.7 would be 5,700 base pairs of telomere length.
Okay.
So you're born, you're conceived with about 15,000 base pairs of telomere length on your chromosome. And then by the time the gestation period is over, about 10 months, you're born with around 10,000. And then with yours at 5.7, you were actually getting dangerously low.
Yeah.
But keep in mind,
working myself and abusing myself terribly. Yeah.
Right. But keep in mind, you pointed this out, this is your white blood cells, which is part of your immune system. Those are dynamic. Those can actually turn over. So those could go up and down a little bit. So my personal takeaway is that your immune system is clearly healthier now than it was a few years ago, because your telomere length is longer, but you have all sorts of different, cells in your body at different organs. So, kidney cells, liver cells, brain cells, skin cells, bone cells, on and on and on, muscle cells can all have different telomere lengths. And I've researched telomeres very thoroughly over the last, decade or so. And I've interviewed Dr. Bill Andrews, who's an expert on telomere length and stuff. I had my telomeres measured at life length in 2013.
Yeah.
And they specifically don't do an average, which is different than most of the other companies that you mentioned, like Telo years. But regardless of that, this is what I was kind of getting into earlier with my company. Telomere length, I think, is important. It's an important data point, but it's just one data point. There's 9 hallmarks of aging, and one of those 9 is telomere attrition, loss of telomere length. And so it's kind of one of 9 hallmarks of aging, but it's in the top third of that category of believing to be upstream. So in other words, it's like more important to the aging process. So my point is that this stuff is super important, and that we just need to do more testing. And the only way we're going to be able to do more testing and learn more is to get this story out and to get more people to be interested in this. So it leads us back to, like, this is why I think you and I are both here right now, to call on the scientific community and just anybody to find a larger interest in this story, and to check it out and to share with your friends, and figure out like how we can make EmCell more popular, make more people aware of EmCell, I think, is the goal, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, because honestly, for me, it is so rewarding to see the results. I mean, with people, people that were on the fence, people that, scrounge up the money, borrow money to go and have it work in their favor. It's delightful. I mean, it's so rewarding to, aside from the fun of my end, but to see it, the payoff of that is incredible. Yeah. Yeah. It's not a magic bullet for everything. It hasn't worked. Some people have really high expectations, and it doesn't meet them, and that's okay. That's just part of life, unfortunately. That, it's like, you try it. If it isn't your thing, if it doesn't give you what you want, then you just don't do it again, But the vast majority are lining up to reschedule, every year, every couple of years, and until they feel like they need it again. So go ahead.
Yeah. So I want to hear, I asked you earlier to share a little bit more about yourself, but one thing that's also very important is, I mean, this is kind of part of the allure, or the kind of people kind of smelling bullshit, so to speak, when you say, like, well, what can this treat? And it's like, well, almost anything. And the reason is because it's a biologic, it's fetal stem cells, it's human cells, and they can turn into anything, any type of cell in the body. And so they can basically heal essentially almost anything, right? From my experience. And so, but share more details.
Sure, I'll get onto myself, but based on what you were talking about. So as we age, we degenerate. Our cells degenerate, telomeres get shorter, blah, blah, blah. We know this. All stem cells are doing are regenerating. They're pushing back against the inevitable. And that is, degeneration, simple. So when you have a degenerative disease in that certain area, whether it be neurological or immunological, that is going in fast forward. All stem cells, fetal stem cells in this case, are doing is like on the battlefield, fighting against that by introducing new human fetal stem cells, powerful cells, to fight against this issue. So that's all they're doing. So, and I will also say that's why people say, well, what do you mean I have to go back? Well, that's because of that reason I just explained. You cannot, like, if you get, pneumonia and you pop an antibiotic, it doesn't mean you have to keep taking antibiotics every 6 months or every couple of years because it took care of that one issue. It's not so simple with the biological machine of the human body. I mean, we cannot defy, at least at this point, the aging process. And if you have, again, like I said, a disease that is degenerative, you cannot defy that by waving a magic wand. I mean, all this can do is slow it down. I mean, anyway, so there's that. So talk about myself for a minute. Like I said, I had no expectations. I was more focused on, I was excited to get it, mind you. But I was focused on the production aspect of it and getting myself documented. And so I get made fun of a lot and say this is inappropriate for the first thing to bring up, but I'm just being honest. Like the first thing that I noticed, I don't remember the time period, but it's roughly a month, maybe a little less, is libido explosion. So it's like, so honestly, it's like, you know, as for men listening, like remember what it felt like when you were like 18 to 24, you know, where that's all you thought about. And so this has nothing to do with erectile dysfunction or anything. So I'm talking about the overall libido, you know, with this subject on the mind, you know what I mean? During that strong reproductive period of your life. And I went, what is this? You know, like it's really, whoa. And so thinking about it, just imagine the hormonal changes and the things going on in your system to cause that. So, and like the joke is, you know, it's like, I don't have time for these thoughts. Like, this is crazy. Like, I mean, you know, I'm happily married. I've been living with my wife for 19 years now. Like, so, you know, whatever. So it's like, it's not like I'm running around town, you know what I'm saying? It's like, but the point is like, that was the first thing. And like, think about how vital that feels in your 40s to like go back in time for that feeling. It's really exciting, you know? So, but this wasn't just libido, like everything that kind of comes with that kind of youthful, kind of excited, kind of, I don't know how to explain it. It's difficult to put it into words, hence why I call it the God cells, because I labored over the title. But anyway, let's get to more specifics though. Okay, this is really a kind of an abstract one, but, and I will say like, I will preface this with like, imagine having the life experience of somebody in your 40s, but like the energy and the focus of somebody half your age. I mean, just imagine what that feels like, you know, like, you know what I mean? So it's like when you're young and stupid and making mistakes, you're just like wide-eyed and you're like, get all this extra energy and you're so ambitious and like, but I regained that. Not that I wasn't already, but but maybe get more specific. And by the way, I'll say it didn't last forever. Like it kind of slowly goes down because it's fighting against the degeneration process of aging. So we'll go back
after a few months or so, right?
Yeah, I'd say more like 6 months to a year. I mean, you know, no, I wouldn't say a few months. This isn't like a few months. No. But I mean, there is a surge in the first few months for sure, but it's not like a light switch. No. It's very gradual. Anyway, so here's what's interesting. I thought was also fascinating. I know how I am being very high strung. Anyone listening to this, I talk fast to get passionate. But you know, when you go through a frustrating moment or you deal with something that might cause anger or stress, one other thing I noticed was how I dealt with that. It was a really interesting aspect to it all. When I mean, like, here's a good example. Let's say you get an email that really pisses you off from something you have going on in your life, and the old era pre-treatment would have probably went blah, 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 send without thinking twice about it. And a couple hours later, I probably shouldn't have said that. You know what I mean? But I stopped doing things like that. I started handling all sorts of aspects of stress differently. And what's interesting about that is that didn't wear off, because this is something in your mind. I retrained how to deal with certain situations. And the only thing I can pin on the difference was the introduction of this therapy into my life. But let's think about that for a minute. What would cause you to be more relaxed under pressure? I mean, just think about that in a larger picture. What would do that? I mean, I would think a well-balanced system, right? I mean, it completely centered me in ways that you could almost equate to like a David Lynch style transcendental meditation or almost ayahuasca experience from that, not to get too extreme, but like it was really interesting, the centeredness it gave you without all the efforts of learning transcendental meditation and all these things. You know what I mean?
I've learned it. It's a lot of work.
There you go. So there's that. Okay, easy things like people you haven't seen in a while go, damn, you look amazing. You know, your skin looks good, your hair looks good, your nails are good, because your skin is your largest organ. I mean, it just goes bam. It just, weird skin issues will clear up. I've dealt with dandruff most of my life since I was a child. I don't deal with that really much. And I will again admit, first 6 months to 8 months to 10 months, no more dandruff shampoo. Then it kind of creeps back again, So things like that. So, but Oh, here's a really big one. Now, most average person living in this world today, we usually get our seasonal flus. We get things like our colds, things like that. I swear to you, I have not had a single cold since 2016. Nothing. Like I have never, I don't know what it's like to have deal with that anymore at all. So here's a really cool example. Like, it was a year later, 2018, no, 2016, it was 2017. A couple months after my therapy, I was walking around with like this weird sore throat for a couple of weeks. And it was like irritating, but I wasn't feverish. I didn't have any other symptoms. And when you know how it gets when you're really busy, you're excited about, whatever I was working on at the time, and you just kind of let it go. But living in Santa Monica, everything's in walking distance. One day I just spontaneously got up from this seat and I walked to the urgent care to just, I called first because you want to see what the wait time is. And they were like, well, no wait time. Went in, they swabbed my throat. The doctor came back in, looked at me like I had two heads and goes, how long have you had this? I was like, I don't know, 2 weeks, maybe more. I don't know. He goes, you have strep. I said, excuse me? He's like, yeah. He's like, how are you walking around? I have no idea. I have no idea. So how do I explain that? I don't know. All I can think of was the cells. So I took an antibiotic, knocked it out. So how can I walk around with 2 weeks with strep throat? I mean, I guess anybody can argue that forever, but I'm sorry, I've had strep multiple times throughout my life. I've been, in bed, fever, horrible experience, hardly able to talk, all those things that come with it. And I was acting like I am now with strep. That's all I could attribute it to anyway. So yeah.
Yeah. And the thing is if it was just you, Eric, with stories like that in isolation, they'd be like, yeah, that's interesting. But like, first of all, your body and how, it's changed and improved. I have a similar type story, not necessarily with like strep or things like that, but I know what I went through when I had the mesenchymal stem cells injected. And I actually documented all the injections on my YouTube channel. And then I did a 1 month, 2, 3 month, 8 month, and 12-month follow-up video to kind of be as objective as possible. And I documented other lifestyle things that I was doing. But even with all that documentation stuff, it's still like life is unpredictable in some ways. And it's hard to narrow things down because there's so many things going on. But the things that you mentioned, like with the dandruff, the skin, the libido, the strep throat, all those things are fascinating in isolation. But if you go further down the rabbit hole, and have done like probably less than 1% of the research or experience that you have with EmCell's fetal stem cells, but I have done quite a bit. I would just message people on Facebook, strangers, after finding their testimonials, like on EmCell's YouTube channel, which I'll link in the description below. Watch those videos if you want to see testimonials. Or some people from your documentary, The God Cells, some of them said their names, right? So I found them on Facebook and LinkedIn stuff, and I reached out to them, and they all had similar stories. And so then you think of from like an investigative journalist standpoint, or just a common sense standpoint, it's like, why would these people be lying to you? Like, how be lying to me? How would that make sense? They actually flew to Kiev, spent a bunch of their own money, did this treatment. It doesn't make sense that they would be lying about this. So that's why it's like, all right, well, more people need to know about this then, that's where it leads me. And that's why I'm here right now with you.
And a lot of those people go back. Like, why would they keep going back? You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Unless again, it was some like extremely ridiculous conspiracy theory. And at that point, it's like, it's worse than like flat earth. It's just like a bad conspiracy theory at that point. So, okay. So we said pretty much like every type of disease essentially, but like, let's get into the details, like, on I believe in the God Cells documentary, and then also on EmCell's YouTube channel, you can see testimonials of, things like autism, type 2 diabetes, all sorts of degenerative type diseases. And you can see Hashimoto's disease, I remember, was a lady who talked about that. And it's, this stuff can seem pretty unbelievable. MS, multiple sclerosis. So you see these type of stories of people improving dramatically, and it's just very intriguing. But then you go to your doctor and you ask your doctor about this, right? You're going to have basically no chance of your doctor probably hearing about this unless they're watching this video or seeing Eric's, documentary on Amazon or YouTube or something. And then even if they have, what I've learned, this is my personal experience, most doctors, like general practitioners, right? And then just medical establishment type people, Most of them do not go down the rabbit hole and like actually investigate things the way that like I know that I do. I have this type of weird investigative journalism type mindset. I think I get it from my mom's dad. Clearly, Eric, you have it as well too. But my point is that even if you are an established like person in the medical profession, it doesn't mean that even if you hear about this, that you're actually going to investigate it and have relevant knowledge and be an authoritative figure on that. So with that in mind, like what can you kind of speak to this this phenomenon, that if you understand what I'm talking about here, and how do we kind of combat this and change people's perspectives about this?
Well, yeah, I mean, when it comes to, say, physicians, I don't fault them. I mean, they went through a brutal, long educational period of their lives. They're working for a practice and they're practicing medicine and they're practicing what they know. It is really not their job to be like we are, going down every rabbit hole to see what's going on out there. Honestly, they have enough on their plate. I'm sure they have families to look after and all those things. So honestly, like I don't fault doctors for not knowing or understanding, because I mean, they have, their days are packed, you know, with dealing with their every day to day. So, you know, it's unfortunate though, that because it's their job to, and they feel it's morally accurate for them to never recommend a therapy that is not approved and utilized on a daily basis in the system in which they work within. It makes perfect sense. I mean, I don't know, I can't blame them. You know what I mean? So
very well. I just interject real quick, Eric. First of all, I'll say very well said. I completely agree with everything you said there. And I wasn't trying to like fault them. It might have came across that way.
No.
You laid it out perfectly. I think I actually recognize how weird of a guy that I am. Like I'm just obsessed with like the truth and researching, and I want to be as healthy as possible and stuff. So I just like, I'll just go. Like when I found out about the God cells, I just did intense research for like months and months and months. And fortunately, I can actually have the time and the resources to do this kind of stuff. But I recognize that I'm like a very small percentage of people that has this type of interest and has the resources to do something like that. So you stated it eloquently, like these people have jobs and lives. And so continue, please.
But I also have over 10 years experience speaking to doctors, interviewing doctors for all the other movies and this one, where they admit, like, let's just take an extreme case, a child with an incurable brain tumor called a DIPG, diffuse intrinsic pontine glioma, which grows in the brainstem. Only 400 kids in the United States get it. 90% of them are dead at 2 years. Never been a cure in the history of medicine on planet Earth ever. 30% of the kids in the phase 2 clinical trial under Burzynski's therapy are cured of this, have kids of their own. And the doctors go, yeah, but I can't prescribe it or recommend it to any of my patients who get this. I know they're going to die in 2 years. I can't do it. So, I mean, like I can't tell you how many stories I have of that. And it's not that the doctors are evil and horrible. Like it just doesn't fit the mold. It's not their job to introduce that. You know, you try to like, if somebody's teaching English, you can't force them to teach Spanish. The curriculum says English. So it's just how it is. If you want to learn Spanish, go down the hall to Spanish. So when it comes to fetal stem cells, you know, unless you might get a lucky break and a doctor's done the rabbit hole, or even luckier, he's been to EmCell and had it himself. You know, you're knocking on the wrong door, and you shouldn't listen to what he says about it. It's not that your doctor isn't a wonderful person and means extremely well. He doesn't know what he's talking about if he has no firsthand experience. You can't comment on something you have no firsthand experience on. I mean, not with any responsibility, you know?
Yeah, sadly, a lot of people do that though, which is the problem. And some doctors do that as well too. Doctors are people. I just want to real briefly have you kind of summarize, because I introduced you as a documentary filmmaker focusing mainly on the health space. And you briefly mentioned the Burzynski documentaries, but I think it's important for the audience to understand that like you have like over a decade of experience, not just with the fetal stem cells and the God cells and that investigative journalism type of passionate work that you've done, but also with Burzynski, part 1 and part 2, and then the second opinion. I've seen all of your films and I've shared them with a lot of people, and I think that they're all fantastic and fascinating stories. So maybe you can just briefly lay out kind of with Burzynski and the anti-neoplastoids and his practice there in Houston, Texas, what's going on there, and any updates that you might have on that.
Sure. Yeah. And I will say, like, my big focus today when it comes to the medical world is still EmCell and fetal stem cells. I mean, I did spend a good chunk of my life on the Burzynski story, and I'm still very much following what they do. But I'm just going to say, like, one of the interesting things that happened, Burzynski basically is going back to accidental scientific discoveries. He found a strain of peptides in the human blood and human urine that had never been discovered before. When he got his medical degree in Poland, he was getting his PhD in biochemistry as well, double major, and he was trying to get himself out of Poland because of communism at the time. And since he was one of the youngest people at the time to get both degrees, the Communist Party really wanted him. Then he discovers a strain of peptides never discovered before in history. As one guy said, it's like finding a bunch of new islands off the coast of Miami that have been there for hundreds of years. Like, where do those come from, right? It really blew everyone's minds, which really put the hammer down and the clamps around the scientist by the Communist Party. So once so it's going to give you the background. So
this is like late 1970s, if I recall, right?
This is late 60s into the early 70s.
Late 60s.
Yeah, into the early 70s. So he ends up landing in America around 74 with his peptide discovery. Still didn't really understand what the hell it was all about, other than he's got this discovery. He runs here away he was only allowed, he had to pull all sorts of strings, and a bunch of friends in high places got him out. But the caveat was he could only bring like $15 with him. So he shoved another like $15 or something in his pants, and he gets a flight to JFK and spends all of his money on cab fare to get to his cousin's house in like the Bronx. And speaks no English. Long story short, he makes his way down to Texas with his discovery, hacks his way through the English language, lives in a car for a while. I mean, this guy is such a story. Ends up teaching medicine at Baylor College of Medicine. Fast forward a couple of years, he realizes that his peptides have to do with proteins involving turning things on and off in relationship to cancer. The National Cancer Institute starts paying attention. They start giving Baylor College of Medicine money, funding him to expand it. National Cancer Institute, this is America's National Cancer Institute. We're going to buy this from you. You're going to work for us now. He goes, he doesn't say it like this, but like, he ran from the bureaucracy of communism. And you can imagine the kind of renegade personality this guy had to get to where he is. He is onto something that he discovered that might be a game changer for cancer. So he hires a team of lawyers. He looks into everything. And Texas, being the renegade state at the time, more so than ever, long story short, it was legal for him to take his discovery, give it to human beings as a person that discovered a biological agent, if you would, and not get into regulatory trouble as long as that therapy stayed within the state of Texas. So he intelligently let the FDA know, or to let everybody know, hey guys, I'm opening up a clinic. So he opens up this like clinic in a strip mall, like next to mat. Here's this guy that barely speaks English, and he ends up having people come in off the street who were told they're going to die, right? So, I mean, to this guy that speaks no English, right, in the late 70s, early 80s, and not all of them, some of them walk out of there cured of cancer. I'm talking non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, glioblastoma, I'm talking people that were sent home to die, These are not like, I don't want chemotherapy kind of people. These are like last ditch effort. So as soon as he started curing people, all hell breaks loose. The federal government starts coming in, accusing him of interstate commerce, tried to put him in jail for medicine crossing state lines because almost everybody was traveling in from out of state at that point, because once the word got out, the Texas Medical Board came after him, tried to take his license away. And they've been going after him, with never been able to take him down. So the moral of the story is, and he's still alive today, he's still treating people today. He managed to get an FDA clinical testing because the whole conspiracy against them by the federal government backfired, where they were forced to open up clinical testing when the FDA thought sure and well they would throw this guy in prison. No one's ever beat the Food and Drug Administration, certainly not one guy. But this one guy kicked their butt in court because 2 sets of jury trials said not guilty, blah, blah. I mean, it's all in the movie. Burzynski, the movie, it's on YouTube for free. So
I'll link it in the description below.
Yeah. So, and then of course I followed cancer patients that were cured right before my eyes of like anaplastic astrocytoma grade 2, which is like precursor to glioblastoma, which is what Ted Kennedy died of, which is what John McCain died of, which is what, incurable brain tumors. I have met children, a kid with kidney cancer who was supposed to die, still alive today. I have met DIPG children who have their own children. I mentioned that a little bit earlier in our talk. Mm-hmm. Absolute mind blower, but it's not a magic bullet. There's certain patients with certain genetic dispositions where his therapy works for. Simple as that. And his therapy, we know now, based on the mapping of the human genome, is a gene-targeted therapy that we're all very familiar with today. It can flip certain genes on and flip certain genes off. And unlike, say, in Avastin, which is a gene-targeted drug that can flip one gene on and off, his invention, which he termed anti-neoplastons, flips about 100 genes on and off, with most of those 100 genes happen to fall in the category of brain cancer. And one of the reasons he did so many brain cancers, first of all, is because you're told you have brain cancer, you have this glioblastoma, it's like a spider through your brain. There's no way to surgically remove it. Radiation is going to make you very injured from a mental functioning standpoint. And chemotherapy doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. So what are you going to do about that? I think I'll go to this Polish guy. And that's, yeah.
And first of all, Eric, you're such a great storyteller, and I loved all those details. And so hopefully what the audience can take from that is that you've built up you have this experience and you built up this tolerance for like following these unbelievable stories that like Hollywood can't write a script like this because they're just so unbelievable.
By the way, yeah, sorry, I want to, because while I'm on this roll, because there's two things I don't want to forget to say. That's very important. Because people are going to start Googling Burzynski now. They hear this.
He's been astroturfed on Wikipedia.
What's that?
He's been astroturfed on Wikipedia, like hardcore.
If anybody hasn't seen The Dissident about the Saudi journalist that was murdered in the embassy in Turkey, you'll see how they created the Saudis created the fly hive of like hundreds of Twitter guys attacking, the media or the anti, Saudi people. That's what happened to Burzynski, and it still happens to this day. So the Wikipedia page on Burzynski is an absolute atrocity, propaganda, and nonsense. Most of the Google searches you find on Burzynski are flat out lies and misinformation. And I'll tell you, I couldn't believe what I saw coming. I was blindsided because the movie was really successful. And talking about Hollywood, 3 huge Hollywood entities tried to make a movie about this and all failed miserably. No one would touch it. And by the way, The Dissident.
Before your first Burzynski movie?
No. After the movie was on Netflix, I got the inbox filled. Every major Hollywood, I'm not going to say names, and some huge celebrities got in touch with me, and they tried and failed miserably. They couldn't go any farther with it because they would not they could not produce this movie.
Right. I just want to say one thing real quick, Eric. I'm going to link in the description below, everybody. There's a TED talk of a PhD lady talking about astroturfing and what that is about in the middle. Cause I want the audience to understand, like I use Wikipedia all the time. It's great. Like most of the time. But astroturfing is a real thing. And the way that Wikipedia actually works is different from the way I think most people perceive that it works. So once you get some type of astroturfing propaganda on Wikipedia, it's incredibly difficult to get it off. And this has happened for like actual individuals of like factually incorrect information, like birth dates. So for example, it could be like, hey, my birth date is X, and it could be a birth date on Wikipedia for my profile that's completely wrong. I go to Wikipedia and be like, hey, I'm BrentNally. Here's my birth certificate. Here's my passport. This is wrong. Change it. And Wikipedia will just be like, no, we're not changing it. So that's what we're talking about here, that much of astroturfing propaganda. Please continue. One
of the biggest sort of cruel jokes on society is that people think Wikipedia is wiki. Like
the source of all truth.
It is absolutely not true. It is, there's gatekeepers that cover that. I encourage anyone here to change any line of any Wikipedia page that is even remotely contested. And set the stopwatch on your phone within 3 minutes at the most, it will be reverted back to where it was. So I encourage you. So anyway, here's the problem. Here's why. And this goes back to fetal stem cells for a minute. Why don't you hear about fetal stem cells? Because they're not a threat, first of all. That's why you don't see any propaganda against them, other than the anti-abortion population, which that's always going to be there. But the reason they came down so hard from a propaganda standpoint against him and against me is this. And this is very, very simple.
When you say him, Burzynski, correct?
I'm sorry?
When you say him, Burzynski, correct?
The reason they came down against Burzynski so hard, and me as this guy that made this movie, because most people have never heard of Burzynski, really, that unless you were in the know until my movie came out. And I won the best documentary award on the documentary channel. I won all kinds of awards in film festivals. It was on Netflix, which at the time was a big deal.
This is like 2011, if I'm going off there.
2011.
Yeah.
Yep, 2011. And then Dr. Joseph Mercola sent it to his like 6 million subscribers. I was on the Dr. Oz Sirius satellite radio show with Burzynski. I mean, slammed onto the scene with this. And it blindsided our opposition, if you would. I didn't even understand I even had an opposition, to be honest. I was just telling a story as I understood it and truthful with showing medical records and data and like FDA clinical testing. And, you know, I had no idea what was going to come at me. But the reason they did that was because, simple, the DIPG, diffuse intrinsic pontine glioma, 400 kids a year are diagnosed with this. All of them die, period. I challenge anybody to find a living survivor with this brain tumor. And if they
die by like age 2 is what you said earlier, right? Like
really young. Sometimes it's 8 months old. I mean, it's very rarely. Occasionally, I did meet one family where the kid was like 12 or 13. You got it. And again, it's like 40 kids in England, about 400-ish kids in America. There's no treatment for this. The only treatment is radiation. And all it does is kick the can down the road a little while longer. That's the end of it. So Burzynski finished phase 1 FDA studies, phase 2 FDA studies, phase 2 with roughly a 30-ish% cure rate. I mean, even if he cured 1 of 100 kids, it's enough to push it forward because no one's ever done that before, right? And so he was given permission for phase 3 double-blind studies, okay? Which means it would not be conducted by him or his people. It'd have to be conducted by children's hospitals like St. Jude's, Boston Children's, or maybe MD Anderson or Sloan-Kettering, all the big cancer centers. He was raising the 150-ish million at the time to pay for these studies. And I'm going to get on that, how the person who was behind that, there's another great story I'm going to talk about in a minute. And guess what? St. Jude's, Boston Children's, every major cancer center said, no, we will not do this study on our property. What does that tell you? Only 400, come on, only 400 kids a year in this country are diagnosed with this disease. Nobody lives through it. It's the only thing invented by humanity ever to cure this. No. Why? I'll tell you why. Because there's 2 parts of the story that made me finally realize the conclusion. The guy who was in charge of raising Burzynski's 150-ish million was an old college buddy of David Axelrod. At the time, was Obama's chief of staff. So he's like, Eric, and I was almost done with the movie. He goes, Eric, whatever form the movie you have, overnight me a DVD. I'm meeting with David Axelrod next week in DC. I was like, sure. And I was really naive and wide-eyed thinking, oh my God, this is huge. Oh, I can't believe this happened.
Yeah, right. I'm going to make a change.
Like, the world is, the oceans are going to part when he sees this. Like, this is going to be amazing. It's like, oh my God, right? So he, 2 weeks pass. He calls me a very weird tone of voice. He goes, Eric, I met with Axelrod. He saw the movie. I was like, wait, what happened? What happened? You know? And he goes, Eric, all he said was, this is too big. He said, maybe in 10 years we can face this. Too big. He's like, and he even alluded that if this was allowed to go, this is like 2 buddies off the record. I shouldn't be talking about this, but I've been talking about this enough now. I had let about 8 years go by before I started blurting on about this, and I don't care anymore. I'll talk about it because I think it's important.
Because we got to make a change, right?
It also shows a larger picture of where we're at in society. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not saying David Axelrod's a bad guy. I'm sure he's wonderful. But let me get to finish this. So he even alluded that if this was released to the market, it could highly be catastrophic to the economy and the industry as a whole.
When you say he David Axelrod, and then that message got passed on to your friend to you.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't even my friend. It was a guy that was employed by Burzynski to raise this money.
Gotcha. Sorry.
He would hire these high-end consultants to run a operation to compete with the big boys. So like you need somebody that knows the right people to raise money, to work with the people to open up a phase 3 double-blind study nationwide, if not worldwide. Like he wasn't just hiring his uncle. You know what I mean? These are like professionals. And hence this professional happens to know David Axelrod, you know? So anyway, the point is though, is that the reason though David Axelrod said that, and the reason that the phase 3 studies were stopped was because if he was allowed to continue, if these hospitals played ball and this phase 3 study was allowed to continue, which is the holy grail of federal Food and Drug Administration testing, and he only cured 5% of these children, it would have been approved for market, okay? Antineoplastons would have been on the market. So what that means is no special permission needed. If you get lung cancer, brain cancer, liver cancer, skin cancer, and you are aware that this therapy is an option, but it's only approved for this really weird, rare brain tumor, you can insist upon it, even if you have to pay out of pocket and your oncologist has to give it to you because it's legally on the market. And because there's so many off-label laws that pharma has lobbied to make happen, to make them another several $100 billion by using a drug approved for one thing off-label for something else. So he just could piggyback off those off-label laws and go, I know it's approved for only 400 kids. He didn't even have to say that. His company and whoever owned the rights to it, And so if me was going to our oncology, they go, you got glioblastoma, you're going to take Temodar, you're going to have radiation. We can try to get it off for surgery. And you go, no, I want anti-neoplastons. Oh, well, your insurance is not going to cover that most likely. I don't care. I'll take out every loan possible. That is when the floodgates would be opened, and down goes standard chemotherapy and standard everything in cancer. Down goes Bristol Myers Squibb. Down goes a lot of companies, because really,
and let's put our like serious business hats on too. That could like crash the entire stock market and the economy.
That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah. And so if you like, for anybody who just thinks this is conspiracy or that would never happen, that's not the way the world works.
This is pragmatism. This is not conspiracy. This is 1 + 1 = 2. This is simple, Yeah.
Right. And it's similar to like with anti-aging, longevity, biorejuvenation. Like this is going on right now because there's lots of therapies that are in stage 1 or stage 2 clinical trials right now, and some that are preclinical trials that, anecdotally and from like my level of research and who I'm networked with, I know this is going to have like insane disruptions on the multi-trillion-dollar pharmaceutical industry. And so this big tsunami, it's coming, right? And it can't be stopped. This story you're just telling was from 2011, a decade ago. So, but I think that it is real. And for me, like networking with and having some conversations with government people and really trying to understand what's going on with this stuff. I mean, it is real, but if there's one shining light of COVID-19, I think it's kind of surfaced some of these things where it's like, okay, our healthcare system was not prepared for this. We do need to be focusing on like health care, not just sick and trauma care, but health care. And so I think that the biorejuvenation revolution is coming. And I think that fetal stem cells are hopefully going to be a part of that. I mean, they will eventually, in my opinion, as long as we don't destroy ourselves. I believe all technology will eventually play itself out. But go ahead, Eric.
Yeah. I mean, I don't mean to like, on what you just said, like, so one more thing about the 2 stories I just said too. Burzynski owns the patents on this. Okay.
That's one thing that I think you didn't mention that's really important. Yeah.
He has 2 entities, his clinic and his research company incorporated. They own it. And here's the interesting thing is that, yes, theoretically the patents should have expired, but once you're in FDA testing, which he's still in that limbo on the books, even all these years have passed, the patent thing doesn't really kick in. There's a certain grace period where you have within the laws that thanks to pharma have created that give him a grace period if it was ever approved. So even if they run the clock out another 50 years, of course, Burzynski might not still be with us, of course, but whoever entity owns that, if they decide to finally release it, there will be a block of time where they can corner the market with this. So the difference between that and fetal stem cells is it's absence of any sorts of proprietariness whatsoever. So there's 2 different worlds we're talking about competing as far as with this system. So that's going back to what you said about hopefully fetal stem cells being implemented. Again, going back into being in this world for over a decade, I don't mean to sound negative or cynical, but you're not going to see this in the United States. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Not for fetal stem cells, not at all. And in fact, I used to be like an activist, especially in the Burzynski days, where I'm going to change the system. I am going to fucking beat this. I'm going to help this thing. And I've realized that it's a waste of time and energy, perfectly honest. I think there's a level of activism that's important. And there's a level of activism that's just placating you until you just croak. I mean, it's just like, I'm sorry, it's true. You know what I mean? Like, so I find that my efforts, my energy is better well spent helping the average person be aware that these things exist at all. So the fact that EmCell and fetal stem cell exists in Ukraine, that's my focus. Focus on the fact that it's there, focus on helping people understand it, and focus on helping them, if I can in any way, get there. And if, like, for example, when I say that, like, if a parent with an autistic child sees my movie and goes, oh my God, this is amazing. I'm going to talk to Eric because he says it's okay to talk to him. And then they email me and they go, are you sure this is okay? And blah, 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 and then I say, well, why don't you talk to another parent? I have a couple of other parents that I know that might talk to you because they were once in your exact position. So that's what I kind of do with myself. That's my way of sort of giving back and being in service in that regard. So that's what my focus is trying to help people beyond the movie, understand this. And maybe if enough people go do it, maybe some tide will slowly change. But in the United States, under our current system, fetal stem cells would wreak so much havoc. It would take like a Bezos or an Elon Musk to go, okay, I'm going to bankroll. I don't care who tries to corner the market, who competes with who. I'll put up $1 billion to pay for all the FDA testing, and everybody else can just have at it and compete with one another. We got to get this in the market. It would take some kind of level of philanthropy at that level, you know?
Yeah, actually, Eric, I pretty much agree with everything that you just stated there. And actually pretty much everything that you've stated, you know, in this conversation, everyone that we've had, because I think that your experience has given you a very clear perspective of how these things actually work, rather than kind of the more green, you know, experience, the more green state that you were in, less experience, you know, over a decade ago when you first started on this kind of investigative journalism, documentary filmmaking of these health stories. And so I'll say within the anti-aging longevity space as well too, we were really excited. I was really excited to see Elon Musk talk about potentially, you know, solving aging in December when he was getting this award in Germany. He was talking about that. I'm a huge Elon Musk fan personally. I have been for many years, been a Tesla investor since 2012. And I think that he's always been a longevity enthusiast, even though a lot of people disagree with me and point out all these reasons why I'm wrong. I think what Elon said in December is like point for me. And as you've seen Elon become the first or second wealthiest person now with Tesla's stock price like 10xing starting in like middle 2019 till now, I've seen the true nature of Elon come out more in my perception, because I follow him very closely on Twitter and stuff like that. So my point is that my perception is that money doesn't really change people. It just allows them to be more of who they are. So if you're a huge jerk, then you get a lot of money, you're going to be like more of a jerk. If you're an awesome person trying to do awesome things to the world, then you can do more of that. And so I agree with you. And I hope like that's part of why I'm doing this. And I think that's the same with you, is that maybe somebody like Elon Musk does see this eventually. Maybe he sees this in like 7 years or something in 2028. But the point is that for me, I've learned enough that I know that government, most likely the way that it is right now, federal government is not going to be saving us when it comes to fetal stem cell regulation or distribution or any anti-aging biorejuvenation technologies. We have to save ourselves. We have to be the change we want to see in the world. And so that's why I, you know, commend you for everything that you're doing on this mission. And I'm excited about the second documentary. Is there anything that you can share about timelines, any spoilers, anything that you can share about the next documentary, the God Cells Part 2 is, I assume, what it's going to be called?
Yeah, I don't know what the title will be yet, honestly. I have no idea. I haven't given it enough thought. Anyway, but well, obviously the first thing is, which is funny because somebody that has spent as much time there as I have, like I said, they completed the clinic in November of 2019. I have still not set foot in this new clinic.
So that's going to be exciting, yeah, because it's like state of the art.
Yeah, and I did get an opportunity to see it while it was being built. I kind of begged them to let me go over there and see it, because I obviously knew I wanted to do a sequel, so I wanted to get some footage of this thing like in its early stages, just for like a 15 seconds of the movie to show this, you know, because this is not just I bought a building and stuck a lab. No, they bought a piece of property, built this thing from the ground up. They broke ground and built everything brand new. I mean, not only do they have a new state-of-the-art facility where they harvest and sort and all of the things that we talked about, but they now are offering different like surgical style rooms where you can potentially go into that vein that we talked about with the heart. But more recently, that they have definitely implemented is the injections into the spinal canal. You need to have a certain setting for that, you know, and they're continuing to. So it's almost like it went from a clinic, you know, like a outpatient clinic, to like a little mini hospital. So it's expanded in that way. So spoilers, not really. I mean, I'm going to film myself getting it again. I will see where my telomeres are again when I go, because this will be interesting because it'll have been almost 2 years versus 1 year in between. And what's the fun is I'm definitely following 2 autistic children that I started filming in 2019. They're going to be there, you know, when I'm there next. And to be honest with you, like all of my films, you kind of fly by the seat of your pants because you never know what's going to happen. I mean, trying to plan a documentary is just impossible. It's like, you have no idea what's around the corner. I mean, you might have some really pleasant surprises with that. Like when just like good examples, like trying to plan the male infertility, that didn't go well. That did not work out at all, you know, because I didn't anticipate nobody wanting to even be in it. But who knows? I mean, I might get some of that in there. I don't know. I mean, I might see some miraculous things occur. They might introduce something to me that they've been working on quietly, that they've been keeping under a lid on, that they might reveal to me when I get there. I don't know, because they've been known to do that, because they're very deliberate and careful not to, you know, just haphazardly start introducing new therapies or new things they've been working on unless it's proven. And like the male infertility was one of them. I said, how long have you been working on this? So like, we're working on this for like 8 years. I'm like, why am I the first one? Why are you just telling me about this? Like, I thought I asked you every question I could think of, you know? So as far as release date, I don't know that either, but I will say that the fun is making it, to be honest. Like, I'm going in May for like 10 days. And what inevitably will happen, and I'm getting ready to sort of like, I put it on the websites, but I'm going to kind of formally announce it in the next couple of days, is that people will want to be there when I'm there, not just because they want to meet me. It's more that they've never been to Ukraine. And the idea of a bunch of people from the same country staying in the same hotel is pretty cool. And we all can like meet in the local restaurants and like, you know what I mean? And they've never been there before. And I've been to Kyiv literally like, I think like 23 times or something. I know where everything is. I know what to do, what not to do. It's, you know, and I just an easy sort of tour guide and point people in the right direction. And again, that's how I meet my new people that I might include in the film. Because I'm, you know, and like when I did the EmCell Experience, or was the short version of the God Cells, the second half of the God Cells, those 3 people I met, I ran into in Kyiv. That wasn't pre-planned at all. The family with the autistic child and the teenager with ADHD, the guy in the motorcycle accident, and then there was another one. Gosh, it's been a while. There's another one I'm sure I'm forgetting. But anyway, I met those people there. I mean, I was alerted by them. We had communication, but I didn't really understand the depth of it all. And also too, I've been filming even back in 2019. I got plenty of people that I've been following, kind of putting in the can, that are sitting on hard drives, waiting to, you know, so I'd like it to be a kind of a multi-year thing where, like, especially in the autistic kids, like some of these kids had trouble speaking. They were very, you know, like simple things like being very irritable, blah, 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 all the usual things that go with that. And now they're like calmer, starting to speak better. And here we are in 2021 on their second therapy. And I get to continue following them maybe throughout the end of 2021, document that. So I guess I could just ramble on forever about that. It's a process. I mean, like I said, the first one took from 2014 to 2017.
Right.
And that was the longest I've ever spent on any movie. I mean, the last movie I did in a year, which wasn't to do with medicine at all. Like Second Opinion took me about 1.5 years. The first Burzynski took me about 1.5 years. I would guess maybe by end of 2022, maybe this will be out. Maybe, you know, I don't know yet. But again, I encourage people to follow the YouTube channel, because what I do is I always keep putting new information up, and the people that might be in the movie you're going to see pieces of, because I love creating new content. I just can't help myself. I don't want to like save everything for the movie. I'll continue leaking some things that I'm doing, you know, on the YouTube channel. So
definitely. And we'll have a link in the description below. I always do detailed show notes, so you can look at the timestamps. I'll have it to the pinned comment in YouTube as well as the description. So one thing that you've kind of touched upon here, Eric, but I want to maybe get into some details if you can, is we mentioned that the fetal stem cells at EmCell can be used to treat all sorts of different conditions. And we kind of laid out some of those, and you were just talking about autism, for example. So can you share a little bit of details about not only, I believe it's the amount of cells that is given for each condition based off maybe the patient size and things like that, but also is it different types of fetal stem cells that they're using per condition? Any type of details you think are relevant in that category?
Well, sure. First of all, the amounts of cells, they always giggle when I ask that question. And they go, you know, Eric, that's a sales tool. These places, they go, we give you so-and-so million mesenchymal. It's a sales tool. I mean, it just sounds fancy. Giving more cells can be bad, especially in the case of fetal stem cells. It's part of the art form is giving the right amount of cells, introducing those into you and letting them go poof. I mean, you don't want it go boof, injected into you. You know, that's why you see my telomere length growing, I mean, more and more prevalent every year, because they're just continuing to expand. So that is part of their understanding of that. When it comes to the general administration, there's different areas of the body certain cell types are administered. To overgeneralize, the more immunological cells, so like the liver cells, which we talked about, building up the bone marrow, yada, yada, and a lot of the organ cells of, say, this part of your system, say, in your abdomen or immune system, are injected into your bloodstream. The neurological cells are injected in different places. In the case of severe neurological ailments, now into the spinal area or canal, depends on the patient. I don't want to overgeneralize that too much, but they're also, they found that before that, they realized that they inject the sort of neuronal type cells. Again, this is overgeneralization, just to make it simple, into the fat around the abdomen. Because of the stability of the fat, the temperature of the fat, and for whatever reason, the slow release into the system of those types of cells, they found that to be the best administrative site. So as far as the types of cells given, and okay, well, if you have like a knee injection, you're going to get specific cells related to that. You're not going to get like heart cells injected into your knee. You know what I mean? So that, but as far as the type of cells giving into all patients, you're getting pretty much the kitchen sink. I mean, you're getting everything. But if you have a certain ailment, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to get heavier doses of certain amounts. Every therapy they give a person is entirely personalized, entirely personalized. That is why when you first arrive, and if anybody has an ailment, they want to see like a year of medical records. But when you arrive, they will do your blood panels, and they will do an ultrasound of your abdomen and other organs, and they will do a urine analysis, and just do like everything that a normal doctor checkup would do and more. And they usually test more in your blood than the average your local American doctor does. And so from that, in addition to what they already know about you, they will choose, they work with the lab technicians and the scientists behind the scenes. The doctors will have a small meeting about you, and they will choose what levels of what cells you get. Again, you get everything, but there's no need to give a bunch of extra cardiovascular cells to a perfectly healthy person with a healthy heart that is having issues with their bladder, for example. Like, you know what I mean? You want more of the, you know what I'm saying? I'm going with this? Okay.
Yeah. So it's, yeah. If I can summarize, it's highly personalized. They have decades of experience on this to go on. So even if, like, you know, let's say Stanford, for example, was like, oh my God, I saw this interview on BrentNally's channel. I watched Eric's documentary. We're going to start using fetal stem cells. The point is that they would need to go to EmCell to learn from them, because they're the ones that have been doing this for decades, and they're the specialists, and they have very specific protocols for very specific, not only treatments, but they're taking very detailed medical history for each individual and considering, you know, their weight, other medical conditions, factoring that all in to come up with a very specific protocol for the patient.
And it's based on years of experience. I mean, every patient is a new data set for them. So, you know, they learn from every new patient. So like if they do it in a certain way and it's working fantastic, they're not going to change that. If anything, they're going to tweak it to see how the next one does. You know what I mean? And if there's certain, they honestly, there's so many years have passed, they pretty much, you know, they've got this humming right now as far as what for each ailment. But to go down specific ailments, there's two categories: more immunological ailments and more neurological ailments. I'll start with the immunological. Anything like inflammatory or immunologically based, I mean, I dare say, without trying to sound overly exaggerated, I mean, overly hopeful, like mind blower, like rheumatoid arthritis, you will almost have it knocked out. Will not last forever. 1 or 2 years, gonna start creeping back. Like if you have trouble picking up the big frying pan and all the stuff, climbing stairs, and all the people that have rheumatoid arthritis, I mean, I dare say, I mean, gone. I just rarely have not seen that happen. They get annoyed when it comes back. And they're like, damn it, you know, it's like, it's been a year. I didn't know it was gonna come back. This is nonsense. I'm like, I'm sorry, you knew this. I was like, you know what I mean? Like, how can you complain about this? You lived a perfectly normal life. You were going to be so debilitated right now if you did not go. It's kind of amusing. I'm sorry to get off on that tangent. Things like Crohn's disease, like I've seen the GI, the scans of these people's colon night and day. Like, I don't know, people with a lot of inflammatory related pain. Like I've seen one guy I met who flew off a tractor. He was young. He really hurt his back. He's actually in one of my podcasts. He was addicted. Well, I don't want to do anything too personal. But he was addicted to pretty heavy painkillers. I think he talks about it. And he was really miserable. And this completely knocked it out. And he also went off his opiates so quickly that it scared everybody, that he was so sick of taking the opiates. And EmCell was really quite irritated how fast he went off of them, because you're supposed to wean yourself. And he was fine. He didn't have any side effects. And what's really weird is I met several more people that were on heavy opiates for highly painful conditions. because they were so excited that they weren't feeling so amazing so quickly that they just said, stop taking it. And they refused to wean themselves off. And that's a whole other conversation is, why is it that people under fetal stem cells are not having these reactions where what's it called? Withdrawal symptoms after going off something they've been taking for so long that is normally supposed to have a huge withdrawal, setback, and they weren't having it. That's another factor of all this. So, I mean, people with like heart disease, people with asthma, people with kidney issues, liver issues, people with the very idea, like older people with like bad circulation, like say diabetes, for example, people that have numbness in the feet and have the neuropathy in the feet and the hands, for example. Every single human being that gets fetal stem cells, one of the first things it does is it builds new capillaries and small blood vessels and makes stronger the existing blood vessels. You can thank, again, the liver cells, the precursors to your entire immune system for that. So imagine what that does to a whole host of things. Once you have your cardiovascular system at full volume, where everything's getting the oxygen it needs, everything's getting the nutrient that it needs, your neuropathy is gone, everything is just like incredible. It's like a renewing of your circulatory system. So you can only imagine how all the side effect benefits you will get from that. You can ask me more about immunological disease if you think of one. But okay, neurological, that's a little more challenging. I wanted to focus on immunological first because it's such an easy one for them. Not them, EmCell, but for the cells, when I say them. Neurologically, these are tough, like Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, autism, ALS, certain things you're born with, like cerebral palsy. These are not easy things to battle. And fetal stem cells are not some magic bullet for this. There are a small handful of people, like this one lady I interviewed for Parkinson's. She's the one that plays the piano and the guys.
I remember.
Everybody to this day is like, this is.
I mean, there's before and after of her not being able to play piano, playing the piano.
Well, no, I don't know if I had it before. Did I? But
I thought so.
Before and after, well, that's okay. We have before and after witnesses. I interview her neighbor. I interview her husband.
Maybe that's what I'm remembering.
Yeah, I mean, that's okay. But like that is an example of like a really insanely wonderful case. She was treated quickly, with less than a year of diagnosis. She had a bizarre case where the Parkinson's was progressing at this really rapid rate, where she went from a little bit of shaking to not being able to drive in a matter of months. And somehow she just bounced back. Like, that is not your usual case. But following people with Parkinson's, like it takes a few rounds. But like one guy in the movie, I mean, he went from not being able to really walk properly and not being able to play golf and not being able to do a lot of things like climb ladders to doing all those things again after a few rounds. This one guy in my movie, Lawrence, so I'm following for a long time, I actually got his doctor on camera, who was his doctor for like 30 years. Like he was his personal doctor for 30 years. And like getting doctors on camera, you can't get a doctor on camera unless they have their own practice. Otherwise, they will never be allowed to do it. I got really lucky with that. He lives in the southeast of the United States, both of them. But he was explaining, you see in the movie, like he needed canes to get around. He was a mess. And he just started getting fetal stem cells. And the doctor was like, oh, well, your money, you want to waste your money, whatever. I've known you for 30 years, whatever you want to do, Lawrence, And he's like, was flabbergasted as he kept seeing him improve over and over again. The guy's driving again. The guy's doing phenomenal. I might do a follow-up with him in the new movie as well, just a quick 5 minutes, because he's doing so well. He's been going back every year, keeping it in check. But I mean, you would never know this man had MS at all.
I remember that specifically. I mean, I've watched the documentary probably 3 times at this point, because I've like watched it with other people. Like when they're over at my house, they're like, trap them. We're like, hey, watch this with me.
Right.
I've done that with your Burzynski movie and other documentaries as well too. I've watched a lot of documentaries in my life, but my point is that for me, I just want things to change so quickly. And I've realized as I've gotten older, like we've already talked about this on this particular video, is that I'll be 36 next month. As I've gotten older and got more life experience, I realized that big changes, they normally happen pretty darn slowly. So the question is like that doctor you're just mentioning, like, why isn't he prescribing this or telling all of his patients about this? Because he very well might not be, even though he knows about this. It's like, well, he's not really going to benefit from it financially. The people might not have enough money. They might not believe it. It might be quite a undertaking for the doctor to explain all this to them. So he just might not even like talk about it to his patients, even though it would be beneficial for them and even though it's true. So that's kind of the point. The reason I bring that up is because that's like what we're up against. That's why it's important that we talk about this. And even if you think that Eric and I are full of, you know what, then like still like call us out on it and let's have a dialogue about this, right?
Yeah, sure. It's like,
because we care about the truth and we care about helping people become more healthy, right? I think that's our motivations.
Here's an important factor, because you brought this up kind of, okay, in Ukraine, because it's the only country on earth doing this, there are a couple of competing clinics. And as a journalist, I've looked into them. I can't get into details, but these are not above board, these clinics. I do not recommend these other clinics. There is no evidence to suggest they understand or have ever harvested their own fetal stem cells. It is an extremely time-consuming, highly specialized and expensive process to take this fetal tissue and convert it into workable fetal stem cells that can be given to people. Not to mention the testing process to make sure it has not got a viral infection or a bacterial. That's a whole, so because it's legalized in Ukraine, kind of going back to what I was saying about if they legalized it in the US, everybody would run to compete with them. That is kind of happens in Ukraine. But it's highly unfortunate. There's a couple of clinics that are, to be polite, not above board. Not. They try to undercut their prices. They try to say, oh, come over to us. We'll charge you 20% of what they charge you, and they go, oh, really? Okay. And you might not even getting fetal stem cells at all. And you might be putting yourself in danger, to be honest. But I'll leave it there. I just want people to understand that, because I can't tell you how many times I've dealt with this. And people will go, I went to so-and-so in Ukraine and I got sick, or I didn't feel anything. I was like, well, I told you. I warned you. And if you think you're just going to go to blah, 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 just because you're going to save money and think you know more than me, who spent 10 years in this, or at least in this case, 5 years, sorry, I don't know what else to tell you, So anyway, I just got to tell you, I'm not afraid of talking to people and pointing them in the right direction if you get led astray or think you're being led astray in this world. So yeah.
Definitely. I did look into one of those clinics, and it is a tricky thing a lot of times when you're doing research on something, whether it be stem cells or like what burger joint to go down, and you find one that's just like way cheaper and you're like, oh, it looks like about the same thing. Why not? But this is not something that you want to like have that mindset about.
Yeah.
So another thing that I think is crucial here is, I focus on longevity, anti-aging. I ask a lot of people that I interview, if you had unlimited resources, if you had all the world's resources, let's say from a financial standpoint, an energy standpoint, what would you be doing to solve the human aging problem? And so obviously I think fetal stem cells would be a big part of that for you. But the question, as I phrase it, is how important, another way that I could phrase this is, you can answer it any way that you want. How important do you think fetal stem cells is to solving the human aging problem? Is it everything? Is it part of it? Do you have any idea? Have you thought about this? Do you think about it like in that way?
Well, if you wanted, solving the aging problem is such a large subject. But right. I'll just simplify it, and this is going to be kind of amusing. So here we are in March of 2021. If somebody said, hey, Eric, here's $1 billion. How would you like to apply this to help the human race from a health standpoint? Does that qualify?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then I would do, first of all, since we're in the bull run of Bitcoin, I put all of it on Bitcoin. I'd wait till it turns into $5 billion, and then I'd sell it. And then I'd take the $5 billion, and then I would run the phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials for fetal stem cells, and I'd tell the country to have at it. That's what I'd do.
There we go. Okay. So yeah, it's clear to me that fetal stem cells is like what you feel is the most important thing for like basically making people healthier. Because when I say solving the human aging problem, the point is there's lots of things that can harm or kill humans, but aging or aging related diseases is responsible for about 110,000 deaths every single day on average globally, out of about 150,000. So that is what's overwhelmingly killing us the most, right?
Here's the thing, Brent. Yes. There's two sides. There's two factors when it comes to this. You and I know what we should and shouldn't do to preserve our aging process, and right. But it's one thing to know what to do, and it's another thing to do it. Yep. And unfortunately, you cannot do a lot about sects of the population that do not care to pay attention to that. You know what I mean? So right. Like
And it's the overwhelming portion of the population, by the way.
Yeah. So like, let's take, for example, something simple like type 2 diabetes. Like you have a person strolling on through life, pounding Pepsis and eating pizza and pounding pasta all day. They might not give a darn about being a little overweight or whatever. And then boom, you got type 2 diabetes, buddy. You just complain, okay, I'll start drinking Diet Pepsi and I'll start, it's like, it's like, you know what I mean? So
that is sadly most people's like kind of answer to that.
Yeah. And of course, does nothing for your diabetes because your body still thinks sugar's coming in. I mean, it's like
totally even make it worse. There's like aspartame and Diet Coke.
Right. So it really comes from the individual. I mean, you're your own boss. Like all of these tools, like you're the contractor. Like this doesn't really answer your question, but like whether you were diagnosed with cancer or whether you're trying to go through your life with the best sort of healthy route possible, you are the boss, you are the contractor. All of these other things, including doctors, are your tools that there are people you hire, and then there's tools that you purchase to deal with that. I really think it comes within the person. And I think everybody, because we're such a complicated soup, what is right for person A is not right for person B. For example, I think there's something very legitimate about a vegan, vegetarian lifestyle from a sustainability standpoint, from a climate change standpoint, yada, yada. And if you want to go that route, I think it's perfectly okay. There are certain human beings, chemical makeup, that don't do well in that diet, and they decline in their health because they're eating only vegan. Not to mention that soy isn't the best thing for you, GMO soy, and that just sends your body into havoc. Like it's just, there's so many areas of this. It's so hard to overgeneralize and how to help. I mean, I guess education. I mean, I guess that would be it. But that goes back to the same problem. It's still in this, you're going in a circle. A lot of people don't want to be educated. They're very content doing what they want, eating what they want, smoking as many cigarettes as they want, drinking as much alcohol. You know what I mean? And you can't get mad at them as long as it doesn't blow back on you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I do know what you mean. As we're moving more into a socialist healthcare system in America, those things do blow back on us, right? That's one of the frustrating things about that is, COVID-19, we're walking around supermarkets with masks on, which, by the way, like I'm okay with that if the private grocery store is doing that rather than a government mandate. It was the governments that were mandating that, which that's where I personally, disagree with. But hey, I'm just one little guy. My life rolls on. I wear the mask when I am in a grocery store. But the frustrating part is that you still have the people loading up with the sodas and all the garbage in that grocery store, which is not only making them more susceptible to morbidity and mortality of COVID-19, but of many other diseases, whether they be communicable diseases like viruses, like COVID-19, or non-communicable diseases. So that was kind of my point on that. But
isn't it interesting how capitalism is creating a socialist healthcare system? Isn't there that irony in this? It's like,
right.
All the stuff that kills you makes the most money. It's the cheapest to produce, the highest profit margin.
Right.
It's thrown in your face all day. It's very interesting.
The way my brain works, I told you my mom's dad was a journalist. I won't get into his story, but I was taught from a very young age, follow the money. And that's what I do. I follow the money, and it normally leads me to kind of how things work. I've done a financial kind of background history of how things have evolved over time. And there's a financial story to pretty much every single major history event that a lot of people just don't know about. So that's maybe a whole nother podcast. But getting back to what I was talking about with solving the human aging problem, my point is that with that question is kind of like, where should we be devoting our resources, our time, our energy, our efforts into? And so the last person that I interviewed here on my BrentNally YouTube channel, where this interview will be, was Professor, he's a PhD, Rodolfo Goya. He's down in Argentina, and he is really excited about Yamanaka factors. I'm not sure if you're aware of those, but they've been able to cellularly reprogram our human cells. So they've taken like centenarians, people over the age of 100, their fibroblasts, which is a specific type of their skin cell, and literally reverse their age all the way back to iPS, induced pluripotent stem cells. And every single way they've measured these cells, they are young. insanely young.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
And so it's really exciting. But then like the further you go down this rabbit hole, it's like, well, why aren't we all like super young? Why aren't we just turning on these Yamanaka factors, which, you know, was discovered by this professor in Japan, Miss Dr. Yamanaka, like, you know, over a decade ago. And he, I think, won the Nobel Prize for it in 2013. And the answer is because it's like, it turns out that they actually like create like tumors, you know, when it's done in the body and not just in a laboratory in a petri dish. So,
because why you're converting it to an embryonic down to the, yeah, go ahead. Probably. Yeah.
So the point is that Yamanaka factors are extremely interesting. There's a bunch of gerontology scientists, gerontologists, and all sorts of other people that are looking at this. And I want them to continue to do that. But we need to look at kind of like the low hanging fruit as well, too. And the thing with fetal stem cells is you can actually, if you have the money, the resources, you could actually go to EmCell and get that right now. So that's something that's separate from Yamanaka factors, for example. Yamanaka factors might be the way that ends up solving the human aging problem or having the biggest impact on that in the long term. But there's nothing that you can or should be doing with Yamanaka factors right now. So I just want the audience to kind of understand that distinction, because there's like researchers and then there's biohackers. And I consider myself to be a little bit of both. I try to be very conservative with the biohacking type things because I don't want to do something that screws up my chances of ending up on this longevity spaceship with you one day, Eric, if we make it to there. Because that's one of my biggest passions. I'm not scared of death. I have FOMO, fear of missing out on the future of all this stuff, right?
You know, when people say, I don't want to be old, I'm like, you should be lucky to live that long. Like, I can't wait to live like to like 95. Like, imagine what the world's going to be like. It's going to be amazing. Like, a lot of people think the world's going to be gloom and doom, and there might be some of that, but I don't know, man. I'm with you. I want to live as long as possible, not for any other reason that I don't want to miss anything. Like, oh my God, you know, think about all you're going to miss when you're gone. Like, you know,
flying cars. I mean, if you look at, you know, we could go to Mars if it's safe enough. If it's as safe as it is to hop on a plane and go to, you know, New York from California, then I would do that. I would go to Mars if it was that safe. But there's one other thing, Eric. I know we're over time right now, so I want to be respectful of that. I love talking with you. But there's one other thing that I kind of touched upon earlier, which is what I would really like to do. And I don't know, this is probably a huge undertaking, but I personally, and my longevity plan company, there's 5 of us that are co-founders. We're really trying to hone in and focus on what are the projects out there that are trying to really understand human aging and certain type of biorejuvenation type techniques, or even just like supplements, nutraceuticals, even taking like prescription drugs like metformin, things that rapamycin. What are these actually doing from a biological standpoint to slow, stop, or reverse human aging? So there's all these different types of ways to measure this. Not even the gerontology community fully agrees on this stuff. But one of the ones that's the most exciting, in my opinion, is DNA methylation. And it's these clocks, these bioaging clocks that have been pioneered by this guy, Dr. Steve Horvath at UCLA, so near you in Santa Monica. And he's been pioneering these since about a decade, since about 2013. And one of the clocks that he's developed is called Grim Age. And it's called that Grim because it's actually the best predictor of when you will succumb to biological aging, when you will die from aging. Wow. It's a better predictor than your chronological age, right? So, for example, we're measuring everybody's chronological ages when it comes to COVID mortality and morbidity risks, right? That's a big thing. Everybody knows that the older you get with COVID, the worse the morbidity and mortality is. In other words, more scientifically, aging is the foremost risk factor for morbidity and mortality for COVID-19. But we're using really good data with chronological age because governments have birth certificates pretty much at every government except for maybe like North Korea or something. Sorry, North Koreans, you're not listening anyways. But the point is that if we had an even more accurate way to measure this person's true age, their biological age that their body is in right there, that would actually be Grim Age. Well, here's the problem. It's like approximately $400 or something to do this. And it's like this esoteric test that like almost like nobody knows about, right? But the point is that even when we've done those tests, there are other tests like that measure your phenotype, which we find don't necessarily line up. So like, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but the point is that there's lots of different ways to measure age, and telomeres are one of those. And I think that's important, but I'd love to, maybe offline speak with you about doing some more of these tests at EmCell, because I think this could be a bridge for the longevity community to become more aware of the work that EmCell is doing. Because if we're getting humans getting their biological age tested, and I'd say specifically the Grim age one would be the best, but that's $400 is $400. We could maybe find a donor to subsidize that. But if they go in and it says, hey, this person's 53 years old, according to the Grim age, DNA methylation, Steve Horvath bioaging clock, and then a year later we retest them and it shows that they're like 49, that would be huge. So we could maybe talk about that more offline. I didn't mean to drop a big bomb on you.
No, it's okay. No, they've been proposed those kinds of things all the time. I mean, it's not their forte to try to, they don't pretend to try to make, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, I think we could talk about it offline, but I mean, I think I encourage anybody that goes to get the therapy to get any number of these tests before and after. I mean, no one's going to.
That's a great point. They can just do it themselves. So yeah.
I mean, I think that's a great idea. But I mean, I guess I feel like, I'm sure that they feel like their hands are full enough to where like, they just don't need that to do that. You know what I mean? Not that it's a bad idea at all. Like the telomere thing wasn't to try to brag about, your telomere. It was just to prove that the cells stay in you. That's all they cared about. We just wanted to be able to show everybody that proof that they stay. I guess, yeah, I mean, knowing them as well as I do, I mean, their focus is on trying to reverse illnesses. The anti-aging thing was an organic thing that came along because it seemed like silly not to give it to healthy people that want it for all the obvious reasons. So
right,
going back to their to sort of the core of who they are, knowing them, I can't speak for them, but I just feel like even if it like worked, like, and they were like, this is unbelievable. I just think that it would take a lot to talk them into doing it because that's not what they're focused on. Does that make sense? Yeah.
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 It does. And this is complex science. And so if this isn't like their background with the DNA methylation clocks and stuff like this, because as I mentioned, it's like so esoteric.
DNA methylation for their cells. I mean, but I don't know in relationship to this, but yeah.
There's other tests too. Like I'm working with a lot of different projects and different people who are doing all sorts of different types of biological aging type tests. Like there's simple things you can do. Like you can buy a little grip strength thing and squeeze that, right? And you could do that and you could get it video recorded of like what your grip strength is, before and after. So my point is like the more of these metrics that we have, the more it could be a selling point, not necessarily like for EmCell to tell all their patients, but to get the attraction, to get the awareness to be raised of like other people in the scientific community of like, okay, this is interesting. Because I know that this is stuff that we all care about in the longevity community. And if EmCell could do this stuff better than any other therapy, then I know attention would immediately go there. So that was more where I was coming from.
No, I completely agree with you. Yeah, I mean, I will say that you asked me about things in the movie. I've considered like doing stuff like that. Like I haven't, but it's a longer conversation. I mean, I'd be interested to hear some of the companies or entities you're talking about, just to check them out. Like for instance, I have had people experiment with some of the telomere testing companies and actually try to trick them by giving different blood for a different document and having them fudge the data to match the document. Seriously, like someone like 35 years different in age and they fudge the data. Seriously, like, so what I'm trying to get at here is I'm not suggesting that the ones that can't be trusted. I'm just saying there's a little bit of a fad attached to a lot of these entities. I'm not suggesting that the ones you're talking about at all.
Right.
Every time I've kind of flirted with it, I went, not touching any of that. I was like, it's not reliable. You know what I mean? So like, yeah.
And it's as I mentioned, it's very esoteric and complex, like the stuff that I'm talking about. And you might have enough on your plate personally, and EmCell might as well too. We're like, nah, we don't want to mess with that. And that's cool. But what I'm saying is that like there's biohackers that are the biohacking like movement is not going away and it's growing even more. Totally. And so that's kind of what I'm tuned in on, because there's people who might just want to record the stuff themselves before and after. And I personally believe, from what I know about EmCell and the fetal stem cells, that it is slowing and stopping and reversing certain aspects of biological aging to some capacity. So that's my belief, not a fact that I have. And so I would just like to use maybe the most agreed upon and cheapest and simplest type measures to do that. And like the grip strength one is like one that's like super easy, for example.
You know what? Let's keep this conversation going, and maybe it would be interesting for me to kind of do a host of these for the documentary sequel and get the therapy, and then do the same ones again, see what happens.
Yeah, basically another way to, maybe I should have led with this. I think it's kind of just low hanging fruit. I think that the technologies are kind of at this point where it's like it makes sense. So yeah, we could talk about this more offline at some point. So, yeah. So Eric, first of all, really appreciate your time. We've gone a little over 2 hours. Are there any other thoughts, comments, feedback that you have? What do you want to leave the audience with?
Well, I guess we covered a lot of ground today, which is great. I can't think of anything that I wish I talked about. But I guess I could just leave it with, like, in case somebody's listening to this that wants to go to EmCell and wants to be there while I'm there, a lot of people, I'll hear from people that did it, made a bunch of mistakes after hearing about me or watching my movie, and like, I didn't want to bother you, Eric, and then I end up cleaning up all these mistakes or helping them with all these things. It's like, it's not a problem. Like, I really find it enjoyable, because how long does it take to respond to an email? Really? How long does it take to, send a couple of links of places I stay, or maybe get in touch with another family, especially when people that have an ailment? I really enjoy it. And again, especially since I'm working on a documentary, you never know. You might end up being in it if you wanted to be in it. Who knows? Also, the fact that this is a fairly expensive therapy, and that the fact I just found out in the last 48 hours, they have reduced the price. That's incredible. That I just think what a gift. COVID is, a little bit of an obstacle. It's just more of a pain in the butt. But I mean, I've been talking to plenty of people that have been going there through this. And I guess, I don't know. I mean, everything else I would say is sort of cliche, It's the old follow your gut, follow your instinct, think for yourself, be your own boss. Yeah, I mean, I know it's a great platform you have, Brent, for giving this information out there. It's great to be a part of it and be able to talk freely for 2 hours and, get all this out. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think the long form, nuanced conversation format that we're in right now is really the best format for like really complex, controversial type things that we're talking about here. Because in order to do it in a shorter format, you have to be like very highly edited and have to have really good skills like you do, like putting the documentary together. And that takes like 3 years. So as you mentioned, so I'm just trying to do the best that I can with the skills and resources that I have, because I care about this stuff, because I care about my family. My dad just turned 70. I want these technologies to be more pervasive and more available and much, much cheaper than what they are right now. But as I talked about earlier, as I'm getting older, I realize that things just take time, and it is what it is. I'm doing the best I can. Eric, I know you're doing the best you can, and I know that EmCell is as well too. So I just really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I hope it's had a positive impact on people who have watched this. Check the show notes in the description below, and the pinned comment will be the same show notes, where I'll have Eric's email in there so you can easily get in touch with him. He's happy to email you back. And any other final thoughts, Eric?
I think we're good. No, I'm good. I'm just excited to be alive in these really exciting times we're in. So, yeah.
All right, Elon. Well, maybe we'll end it with this, since I'm an Elon Musk fan, and it's fitting to what you said. Elon said, the future is going to be weirder than you think.
Yep. And more awesome than you think.
Yep. All right. See you guys.
All right. See ya.